Okay, at this time, I believe we have all the directors who we are expecting for the beginning of the closed session. Notice of the time and place of these committee meetings was publicized by notifying the area news media, by publicizing same in the Omaha World Herald, OPPD outlets newsletter, OPPD.com, and social media, by displaying such notice on the arcade level of Energy Plaza, and by emailing such notice to each of the directors on October 14th, 2022. Director Bogner has notified me that she will not be able to be here at the beginning of the meeting, which is why I'm giving the introduction. Thank you all for joining us remotely via WebEx events. As a reminder to board members, executive leadership, and OPPD staff, please mute your microphones to reduce background noise. To members of the public, thank you for attending. You are in listen-only mode. If you have any technology questions, please use the chat feature in WebEx to communicate with the event host. Our agenda for today's meeting is as follows. We will conduct a closed session this morning to discuss two topics: Nebraska City operational update and legislative and regulatory strategic planning. We will conclude this morning's closed session no later than 9:50 a.m. in order to open the WebEx meeting to allow public and OPPD staff to join. We will begin public session at approximately 10 a.m. and receive reports from each committee. Director Molhoff, do we have a motion to go into closed session?
Yes, I move that the board go into closed session at this time, 7:01 or 8:31 a.m. to discuss two topics: the Nebraska Station operational update and the legislative and regulatory strategic planning. With respect to the Nebraska City Station operational update, a closed session is necessary for the protection of the public interest. Discussion involves matters that are confidential and protected by the attorney-client privilege and attorney work product doctrine, and involves utility infrastructure information and competitively sensitive commercial information, which could harm the district if disclosed publicly.
Director Molhoff, do you have information about a second item on the closed session this morning?
You know what? I don't.
And that's okay. I'm looking at some information as well, and I might ask if Steve Bruckner is here. We have multiple people who have been involved in assisting with board operations in the past who are not currently at this meeting. Steve Bruckner, can you help us clarify whether or not we have a second item on our closed session agenda this morning?
I don't know that I can. I thought that there was going to be a discussion related to the legislative strategic issues.
Steve, can I just jump in?
Yeah, please do. Yeah.
We do have a second item, and that's a legislative and regulatory strategic planning. Very quick update in closed session. As we are getting ready for positions and items that we may see come up in the legislative session. So, Steve, can you just briefly walk us through why that item is appropriate for a closed session?
Yeah, that was my. Thank you very much, Javier. That was my recollection as well. And so to add to Director Molhoff's motion, the reason for the legislative and regulatory strategic update is that it's in the public interest to hold a closed session on that matter to discuss items that may involve attorney-client privileged matters, but also may involve issues related to utility infrastructure, utility security, cybersecurity, and the like. And for that reason, a closed session is necessary in order to protect the public interest.
Yeah, Mr. Bruckner, after talking to Director Molhoff, we went ahead and put that into open session, and that is in the public information portion of the meeting. So that is why there is only one in closed session at this point.
So will there be any discussion related to the legislative then?
There will not be.
Okay, thanks for clarifying.
Yep, thank you.
Great, and I apologize to everyone listening and participating for the confusion. Again, we've had some changes and availability issues this morning, but now that we have clarified, there will be one item for closed session as displayed on the screen: Nebraska City Station operational update, which was covered by Director Molhoff in the motion. Do we have a second for the motion to go into closed session?
Okay.
Second.
Okay. I'll call the roll. Bogner? Am I muted?
Not present.
Kavanaugh? Howard?
Yes.
Mulhoff?
Yes.
Spurgeon?
Yes.
Williams?
Yes.
Yoder?
Yes.
Okay, motion carries.
Motion to go into closed session has passed. This closed session will be limited to discussion regarding one topic, Nebraska City Station operational update. No votes or other action will be taken. All right, and at that time, we would like to remove any public attendees from the event so that we are prepared for the closed session.
Good morning. I have 10 a.m., so we'll get going again. A motion and second is required to reconvene in open session. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
All right. Ms. Labs?
Bogner?
Yes.
Kavanaugh? Howard?
Yes.
Yes.
Mulhoff?
Yes.
Moody?
Yes.
Spurgeon?
Yes.
Williams?
Yes.
Yoder?
Yes.
Okay, motion carried.
The motion to come out of closed session at 10 a.m. is carried. This closed session was limited to discussion regarding one topic, the Nebraska City Station operational update. No votes or other board action were taken during the closed session. Earlier, before the closed session, Director Williams, made the announcement regarding public notice of this meeting. As a reminder to board members, executive leadership team, and OPPD staff, please mute your microphones to reduce background noise. Members of the public, thank you for attending. You are in listen-only mode. If you have any technology questions, please use the chat feature in WebEx to communicate with the event host. Per the board's guidelines for public participation, we do not take public comment during the all committees meeting. We will take public comments at the board meeting on Thursday, October 20th, which will be conducted in person at the Omaha Douglas Civic Center and begins at 5 p.m. The public may attend in person or remotely via WebEx events by going to OPPD.com. Joining me today via WebEx are my fellow board members, Mike Kavanaugh, Sarah Howard, Janice Mulhoff, Craig Moody, Mary Spurgeon, Eric Williams, and Rick Yoder. We also have President and CEO Javier Fernandez, our General Counsel Steve Bruckner with the Fraser Stryker Law Firm, members of our executive leadership team, and OPPD staff. Let's see. Additionally, we have $14 attendees in the meeting, consisting of OPPD employees and members of the public. We conducted a closed session earlier to discuss, one topic, the Nebraska City Station operational update. Today we will hear the following committee reports: Governance from Director Moody, Finance from Director Yoder, Systems Management and Nuclear Oversight from Director Williams, and Public Information from Director Mulhoff. Javier Fernandez will now give the safety briefing.
Thank you, Director Bogner. So for the safety briefing, Christy, can you go to the next slide, please? Physical safety, always important. The work we do in the office, the work we do out in the field and in our power stations is incredibly important for us to be safe, so we can go back home after a days of work. So for that, make sure that we have that you all have awareness of where if you are in a public building and you have an AED, that you know exactly where that is, that you have a first aid kit, that it's well stocked. If you have a chance at one of the breaks that we have here coming up during the meeting, I encourage you to do that, take a look around your area where you're sitting. Make sure that you don't have any environmental hazards, tripping hazards, cords, toys of anything that could be on your way to exiting your place if you have an emergency. If you're feeling ill, we ask you to stay home, recover. The wonders that we can do with WebEx and other technologies for virtual meetings help us participate and still not share viruses. If you're not feeling well during the call, I always remind people, please make sure that someone on the call has a way to assist you. If you're at home, if you're in a place where you don't have anyone that could help you physically, make sure that someone on the call has either a phone number of a loved one or an address where we could send help if you were to need that help. Finally, for OPPD and OPPD facilities, we have an active shooter code 32. If we hear that through the speakers here in Energy Plaza or in any other facility, we will run, hide, or fight. That is our strategy for an active shooter. Again, when you take an opportunity to at the next break, I encourage you to do this at your home or at anywhere you are. Stand up and figure out if you had to run, where would you run? Where would you exit and escape in the case of an active shooter? Where would you hide? And if you had to fight, how would you do that? It's always important for us to have that mental exercise. We hope and pray we never have to use it, but you certainly don't want to figure that out at the last minute when you do have to use it. On the right side, we have a psychological safety. It's important for us at OPPD to have a psychological safe environment for all of our employees to be able to voice their concerns and opinions about everything, right? And have a good, healthy dialogue. In this case, having multiple perspectives is very, very important. That's the one that I'm going to focus on this morning. Understanding that my perspective is only my perspective, and there are many, in the case of OPPD, almost 1,900 perspectives, individual perspectives, and being willing to open up, listen to other perspectives, creates a culture of psychological safety. This is very important, and I'll give you a good example. When we have many hundreds of people working on one of our generation units, having the psychological safety to say, hey, something doesn't look right, something doesn't sound right, something is out of place. Let's have a conversation and figure out if there is any asset management discussion that needs to take place, and have those conversations in a psychological safe environment is incredibly important, not only to keep us safe, but to keep our units running and well maintained. Next slide, Christy, please. It's cold. This is Captain Obvious here reporting that it was very cold this morning and it was cold yesterday too. So with the cooler temperatures and the season changing, we have the risk of freezing, ice, frost, leaves, reduced daylight can all make traveling on roads, even walking on sidewalks more difficult. So it's usually this change of season when we tend to see more incidents. So we ask you and our employees to be on the lookout for tripping hazards from this change in season. Same with the change in season, the fire prevention at work and home is important. We earlier in our closed session, we were talking about a space heater, right? And it's the time of the year when we're bringing out space heaters and heating blankets, electric blankets, and things of that nature. It's incredibly important for us to review and practice fire safety. I encourage you at home and here at work. Of course, we have regular checks of all of our fire extinguishers, making sure that they are charged, that they are not expired. So it's important for us to have that position. And then the last and the one that we always remind our folks is to warm up before any activity to avoid sprain, strain, or tear injuries. I've mentioned before, and Kevin McCormick reminds us when he does a safety monitoring report, that most of the incidents that we have seen in recent years are soft tissue injuries. Thank goodness they haven't been major injuries, but still soft tissue injuries happen. And so warming up, having an ergonomic mentality, making sure that before you start an activity that you have that well planned and your body's warmed up is important to avoid that soft tissue injury. And with that, that concludes my safety briefing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, we'll get into it here. The first topic on our agenda is Governance Chair Report. Director Moody.
Thank you, Director Bogner. Good morning, everyone. The Governance Committee Chair Report is going to be very brief because we did not meet this month. There were 2 items for us to discuss. Both items are on the agenda for today, so there was no Governance Committee meeting. So that concludes my Governance Committee Chair Report. So let's go on to SD12 monitoring report if we could. In lieu of that committee meeting, we did have an asynchronous check-in just to make sure that the report that you're going to see here in a moment was satisfactorily covering everything that the committee wanted to see and to ensure alignment with respect to the recommendation that you'll see at the end. So there were no comments. We were pretty tight on it. And as you'll see, it's pretty consistent with what we've done in the past. So no big surprises from that standpoint either. So to that end, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Kate Brown to walk us through the SD12 monitoring report. Kate?
Good morning. Thank you, Director Moody. Good morning to everyone. So I'm Kate Brown, Chief Information Officer of OPPD, and I do have the pleasure this morning of presenting monitoring report for SD12 Information Management and Security. I'm excited, as always, to talk about this as a representative for the great work across the district done by many employees. As we typically do, we are presenting this during October, which is Cybersecurity Awareness Month, which I love that. We have many activities planned across the district in regards to this, bring in speakers, and I would encourage everyone to go out and read information about security and from a personal and a work perspective, because it's a very important topic. We live in an ever-changing world, and it's always good to go out and get information. The theme for us this month is, if you see something, say something. Those are very six simple words, but they have a huge impact. Keeping people's awareness up and talking about what we're seeing so that we can correlate information and respond accordingly. With that, I will jump right into the monitoring report. And I really appreciated the word consistency that you used, Director Moody, because that's very much what we are about. We are trying to maintain consistency of what we are doing and build upon that throughout the year as we move forward. This slide is a summary of SD12. And the fact that the board has identified Strategic Directive 12 as important for us is really just wonderful for OPPD and their customer owners. This really sets the tone in the company around security, and we take this very seriously. So what I see here when I look at this is be secure, protect our customers, manage risk, and be compliant. 4 pillars of what we do. I'm going to walk through the report today, and you'll see how we take this and seriously apply it into the environment to maintain our security posture across the organization. So how do we do this? We have a model that we use, which is we have ongoing controls in the environment, and then we have new initiatives and controls that we build in as we see the ever-changing environment around us. There probably isn't a day that you can't pick up a news article or hear on the news something about a security incident or something happening to a company, to a person in regards to this. It's a very evolving, ever-changing environment, and we need to stay on top of that. So we build our base level of controls that we check, double check, make sure they're doing what they need to do, and then we're injecting in new things, new initiatives that we know or understand from talking with others and the work that we do, that we need to do that. So it's a dual approach. There are also controls that we may determine that we need to retire because they are no longer effective. They may not be doing what they were needed because the environment has changed. So there's this very active environment in terms of what we're doing in these spaces. So we're going to walk through this at a high level in terms of the different components of SD12. So the first component is information security, also known as cybersecurity, and we continue to make progress in this area. We are raising the investment, as many organizations are doing, because it takes money, people, time, and effort to continue on the work that we're doing. We have a strategy and a direction that we've evolved, and we keep evolving that, focusing on improvements both small and large. There are many things that we can do in different directions, and we keep looking at this. How do we do this? So we have the ongoing controls in this space that keep our technology safe. This could be vendor interactions on the services we provide. We regularly assess these controls to ensure that our capabilities are mature and they're continually improving and they are efficient and effective. And that takes many forms in terms of what we're doing there. The security controls are all defined by our policies with industry standards and best practice alignment. And we've done much work in this space over the last year in terms of taking the policies that we have, reevaluating them, and ensuring that we're looking across the horizon, out in the environment, and seeing how do we need to alter these policies to keep them aligned and keep our data, our assets safe, as well as our customers and employees. And then on top of that, our workforce receives regular training and security awareness, and we test that. And we do this I think we do this very well as a company, and other companies commented on how we do that. And this is really critical for all companies to do this because our best chance of working through something that would be a security situation is our employees. They are out and about. If they see something, they say something, and then we can correlate and understand that information, raising their awareness and their understanding of what others might do to come into the organization is huge. It is the core of a successful security program. Moving on, we have the second objective, and this is around customer privacy. Like I say, we take all of these very seriously. So this includes processes and practices to protect customer privacy, including how we collect information, how we store information, whether or not we share that information. We have ongoing controls that relate to identity theft prevention program. We started collecting data in 2009 in regards to this, and this is a cornerstone of our efforts in this space. This requires employee training, regular reviews. We test and look at all of this. The Red Flag Report provides proactive communications to our customers based on fraud-related trends and events. And that rule was implemented in 2007, and it was amended in 2010, but we continue to take that in and use that as a cornerstone of what we are doing to protect our customer information. We also issue formal press releases throughout the year to make customers aware of what's going on in the fraud and scam space. We leverage Nextdoor to do public service announcements, and there's excellent communication and coordination between customer service, public affairs, and the security group within OPPD in terms of educating customers, watching what's happening, and responding accordingly. Our next objective, the third objective, is records management. You can think about this as maintaining the health and security around whether it's digital, paper, it doesn't matter what type of information this is. This is around how we maintain, destroy, keep healthy all our records in the state of in the situation that we're in. And this aligns to all the legal requirements that are out there. So we have ongoing controls in this space that we maintain and we train our employees on. We share knowledge with other utilities about how to do this, and we make sure that our staff and internal processes are reviewed and that they meet legal requirements. In this space, we work a lot with industry partners. So there's ARMA, the Association of Records Managers and Administrators, and also URIM, Utility Records and Information Management User Group, as well as this talking informally or formally with other utilities around what they are doing and how they are leveraging different tools and different expertise in this space. It's an area that we are proud of what we're doing, and we're continuing to evolve and move in the direction to ensure that records are always kept safe. And our fourth component here is ensuring that we comply with contractual, legal, and industrial requirements across the technology domains. In this area, we partner with legal counsel and OPPD experts for advice around this topic of legal and compliance. And so we do this in regards to the areas of security and privacy. We have ongoing controls in the application and implementation of our security controls. They're evaluated regularly in this space to ensure that our people, processes, and technology have the desired maturity and our security capabilities and align with corporate mandates and our policies. I mentioned policies early on, and those interweave through all of this. They are critical. They are foundational to what we are doing. And so this makes sure that we also are aligning and meeting legal and regulatory requirements, because that's interwoven through all of this compliance space. These internal and external evaluations can be in the form of audits, assessments. We do penetration testing, simulation exercises, tabletop exercises. All of that is in play as we look at this space and what we're doing. And that would be true in many ways across the whole security realm in terms of what we look at. When we do those activities, we identify the gaps that we have, we document them, and then we build out a mitigation plan through our risk management process. We found this to be a very valuable process and very effective. By leveraging a risk-based approach, it's been proven that we can make changes and continue to build our security ecosystem in a way that is actually very impressive in terms of what the teams are doing in that space by learning from what we're doing and employing that into the different areas that we have and weaving those things that we identify into what we build into the future. So that covers all of our base level controls and the different things that we do in the 4 areas that were outlined in SD12. Now I'm going to talk about what we've been doing this past year to enhance and embed more things into this as we go forward. I'm going to highlight some things that are on this slide. I'm not going to walk through every bullet there. You can pretty much read that, but I'm just going to highlight a few things that I think are really important here. Under information security, so we've continued specialized training in this area and awareness activities. As I mentioned, we do a lot around employee awareness. It's a critical component. Every year we do Cybersecurity Month, and we really bring in many people to talk about how to raise your game in the security space, whether it's personally or from a professional perspective. And we put out articles to employees. We do a lot in this space to keep this in front of everyone's minds, because that's really what's going to help us. So we continue to enhance what we're doing in that space. Incident response and disaster recovery, these are really critical components. They aren't the funnest things to do. Sometimes people feel like, especially disaster recovery, because there's a lot of heavy lifting within that space to ensure that you can recover technologically from a disaster, but it is critical. And our incident response capabilities, we continue to grow that. These are just 2 really important areas. If something should happen, how we respond is critical. And you can see that you can read about companies that may not have done some of the work that we're doing and will continue to do, and found themselves challenged to respond in the moment to what's happening. So this is really, really important, and many employees are working on this day in and day out. And like I said, sometimes this may not be the funnest of areas to work on, but it is so critical, and we've been doing some great work in this space and will continue to do so. And this, once again, this ties back to a risk-based approach in terms of where we're putting our focus, time, and energy. Our relationships, whether it's with the state, federal, industry type areas, data sharing partnerships, other utilities, we continue to grow that. We have strategic partners that bring information to us. We are growing our ability to have relationships with other groups and to bring information into us and also share with others. So it's this 2-way sharing of information that's helping everybody get better in this space, which is critical. And I just want to double down how important that is. In the information management and customer privacy area, so I'm going to focus a little bit on reviewing industry trends in alignment with our strategic initiatives. So, we've had these strategic initiatives that have been over the last 18, 24 months. We've learned a lot. And as we look at how we are going to become an ever evolving digital environment, how do we layer in this blanket of security? How do we interweave it into this? And we've leveraged strategic partners in this space. And going back to forging strong relationships, that's going to be our best path. And it was great how the strategic initiatives, we are so collaborative in that space, that allowed the security folks to take that in and to continue to build on what they understand of where we're going and the capabilities we'll need as we move forward, and what other strategic partners we might need in that space. And then we focus once again on industry experts and those that can help us the most to learn out there so that we can continue to embed it into what we're doing. In the records management space, we completed a retention schedule, and we had redone many parts of that. It needed to be reworked based on changing situations. Time had passed, and we also submitted that to the state of Nebraska Records Management Office and received approval, which is outstanding work by many people. And then we also established a data management policy this past year, which we did not have, going back to policies and how critical they are. And this is around being able to classify our information so that we can apply the appropriate controls to that information. It's a great work by many people in that space. In the compliance area, I'd like to highlight the continued focus on the digital transformation, cloud technology growth, and the convergence of the operational technology group with the informational technology group. This brings together so many things, and it ties once again back to the strategic initiatives and where we're going from a digital perspective. Companies moving into the cloud. A lot of companies are trying to figure that path out and how security works within that space. And we've done a lot of work around that. And that's been fantastic by a lot of different people, so that as we move either into the cloud or we determine not to go into the cloud based on the needs of the business, we're laying a path and identifying standards and policy around that. That's very critical before you get in that space. And then the convergence of the operational groups with the information technology groups continues to grow our capabilities in this space, where we can see all the different aspects of security across the organization, correlate events if needed, and understand where we need to take more action, and use similar tools so we understand the environment from a cohesive, holistic perspective. All of those things are driving us down the path of increased security and understanding of how to address what we're seeing out in the world today. And lastly, in this space, I want to talk about measurement, metrics, and testing. These are areas that we've focused on because we need to ensure that we can measure the work that we're doing, and that the metrics are meaningful and represent information that can be digested by our internal employees, the executive team, and ultimately the board, to show that we are meeting what we need to do, and that where the measurements may indicate we need to provide more focus, more investment, more employees, whatever that needs to be, if we have objective measures, it will help us. And so we're using standards there to do that measurement. And I mentioned the testing before in terms of doing tabletop activities, bringing other folks in to do different types of testing, whether it's penetration testing or other maybe newly identified testing that we can employ to help us understand gaps, and then once again applying a risk-based approach to this. So that outlines the different things that we've been looking at over the past year to bring in as new, and then embed that into the environment that will become also a part of the base work that we do from a security and information management perspective. And with that, based on our efforts in the areas of security, privacy, records management, and overall compliance, management recommends that the Governance Committee accepts this monitoring report for SD12 and find that OPPD is taking reasonable and appropriate measures to comply with Board Policy SD12 regarding information security and policy.
Okay, thank you very much, Kate. Well done. Such a meaty topic. Colleagues, questions? Start with questions. Questions for clarity. Anyone? Not hearing anything, and I haven't seen any hands. I'll ask a question, and it's a zoom out question for you, Kate. You've been with the district 7, 8 years, is that right?
7 in January.
7 in January. Okay. So if I'm not looking for the full history here necessarily, but I'm curious to kind of hear you describe the evolution of this work over the last 7 years, the extent to which it's grown, both in terms of the focus, the staffing, just if you could just kind of paint that picture for us with respect to how this has evolved over the last 7 years.
Yeah, that's a great question, Director Moody. Thank you for asking. So when I came into this, I would say that we had some very strong foundational components to security. There were some really great things that were going on. And the compliance space, because the nature of a utility and what needs to be built, there were some really good components to build upon. It needed more investment in the space of it to do that, though, and we've gotten incredible support for that. It required us to step back, kind of like you're asking me right now, to step back and think about this in an enterprise level. I would say we were very much more focused in specific areas, which was great because that allowed some really, really good depth to occur in that area. As I mentioned, though, it requires all employees to up their game in this space, not just specific areas. So I think as time has gone on, we've brought different folks into the environment and we've leveraged the skills and capabilities of the people that were there, but differently, and grew that enterprise perspective. We have shifted the tone and nature of how we look at security from an enterprise level, and we've shifted how people bring forth information about it. And I would like to call out the risk management process that we have has been a huge force in this that comes through the corporate strategy and governance area, Scott Foch's area. This marriage between those two areas, which has been huge, along with you can pull audit into that along with it to help in that space, has really grown how we think about that. Layering in utility ops and what we brought over from the operational technology space, now you really see this growing, this holistic view of how we're doing that. And then the next layer was the relationships, whether it's with local law enforcement, whether it's with other utilities, FBI, DHS. My goodness, you layered that in on top of it. And then physical security combined with cybersecurity creates even another layer around that, which we have done. And so I am so proud of this organization and what we've done because we had great foundational components. We lifted that, we built, and we're going to continue to do that. We have to. Every organization has to do that. And we've been supported, and the investment into the organization has been fantastic, and we've done it strategically. We've been good stewards of the dollars, I'll say as well. And we've always kept in mind customers information, employees' information. How do we protect it? So that's how I kind of summarize the journey we've been and where we sit today, which is very much an enterprise view of security, which is an outstanding place for an organization to be.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. That's super helpful for us to kind of make sure we understand and wrap our heads around the level of effort required, the resources required, and the multiple layers and different stakeholders are so significant. So that's great. Janice, I see your hand. Go right ahead.
Yeah, so Kate, this is a lot of work represented right here, and I understand that. Almost weekly or at least monthly, we read and hear about large organizations in Omaha who've had data breaches and cybersecurity challenges. Are you, as a metric on this, are you confident that OPPD is protected against these data breaches that we've seen and these attacks that we've seen in our local community? Are we Are we protected in a way that you're confident that our organization is safe?
Kate, before you get into that, just be a little careful about the response if you just want to jump in on that. That's an item we discuss in closed session, and it's very sensitive, but sorry to interrupt.
No, thank you for that, well, question, the comment. So I would say I have confidence in the work we are doing in this organization to address what is happening around the world, basically. I have confidence that we will continue to do that work, that we will continue to invest in what we are doing to address what is happening. So I have high confidence in that is how I would frame it, if that works for you, Director Mulhoff. Thank you for the question.
Dr. Williams.
Yeah, I realize the title is Information Management and Security, but kind of at the other end of that is the availability and ability of data to help us progress on a clean energy transition. There are a lot of grid edge technologies that represent significant potential, but require access to, for example, real-time meter data, really truly effective. Do you have any comments about the way in which we are considering the ability to make information available to improve our operations and the way we engage with our customers relative to, as you described, the privacy considerations that we have at kind of a peak priority as well. So I know that that's kind of a careful balance of making information available for potential beneficial uses while keeping things private and protected. So do you have any comment on that?
Thank you, Director Williams. I would say that we understand, well, we are gathering, we have much data in our organization, not unlike any other organization. It will continue to grow as we become more digital, to your point around meters and other things that will happen across the environment. We are building through the strategic initiatives, that was a component of the strategic initiative around data governance, around management of data, and how we will store, share, access, all in alignment with policies and the legal requirements around that. So it's something that we have our eye on because we know that we're going to need to, we will have more information. We will need to correlate that with external information, but we always need to understand that it is our topmost priority to protect the information and to only share it in a legally viable manner. And so all of that comes to bear as we build this out. So we understand the desires around the information and what that might bring and how that might help drive decision making, information for understanding where we're headed. All of those things come into play, but it will be grounded in governance, the protections that are needed around it, and understanding legal requirements around it. So I don't know if that helps you that much, Director Williams, because that was a pretty broad-based answer to the question, but it is something we are keenly aware of what you are articulating.
Yeah, and I guess the specific point would be some people wish to keep their own personal information and secure, and OPPD does a good job of offering that to them. Others might wish to intentionally distribute information to someone else where they might find a benefit of energy storage management or that type of a service that can only be provided with successful collaboration between an individual, either business or personal customer, the utility, and a service provider. And so I guess that's kind of where the question is pointed is, one side of it is keep everything safe if that's what's requested by customers. But when it comes to customers who might wish to, with their own information, take an additional level of engagement or risk or sharing that information, how do we facilitate that for them? And I appreciate your response about the ways in which we're preparing for that. So I don't have a follow-up question, but I did just want to kind of where I was asking, not that we give out lots of information about lots of people, but that we facilitate if individuals wish to have their information made available. How do we make that a possibility for them to participate in kind of advanced services? So thank you for the response. That does address my question.
Thank you for the clarity on your question.
Okay, thank you, Directors Mulhoff and Williams, for the questions. Pausing for a moment for other directors. Any additional reflections on what's been accomplished or challenges or gaps? Okay, I'm seeing head shaking sideways. I'll just offer one quick thought, and I think this is just planting a seed for maybe a conversation down the road, and maybe this is a DOA situation, but my recollection is that we've not changed the strategic directive for at least perhaps the last 4 or 5 years, and I'm mindful of how much this has changed as well, the work that Kate's team is doing. So it just has me wondering, and I have no idea as to whether or not this is the case, whether or not we need to make sure that the strategic directive is still doing what it needs to do in terms of providing the organization direction on this particular issue. Again, this is perhaps something that comes up in a workshop down the road, but that's at least part of what I have on my mind with respect to this directive, is making sure that it's still standing the test of time. Director Williams, I see your hand popped up. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, I guess following on that question, following your comment, my question about the way in which we make information available doesn't seem to be specifically addressed in the policy language, and I'm curious if there might be a way in which we should consider that. I don't know if that's something that Kate and her team feel would be appropriate, or if the language we have gives clear guidance on the policy direction of specifically wanting to facilitate people using their own information for advanced energy services. So I guess my comment is I would also be interested in that discussion about whether language updates would be necessary to clarify what it is we intend for the way in which information is managed and intentionally made available for other purposes.
And I'll just, for purposes of maintaining some unity of control, echo what Director Williams has described in terms of how we approach that. I'll stop there. It was a question that was raised in my mind as I was reviewing this as well, is where there's an opportunity. Again, I don't think we need to explore it now necessarily, but in terms of future exploration. In light of all that, I'll pause again just for one more moment. Colleagues, I see Director Spurgeon's hand. Go right ahead.
Just want to say that I have a feeling of reassurance that this is something that is being managed really, really well by you, Vice President Brown, and thank you for that. Your competence and the degree to which so much is happening is very reassuring to me. So thank you for your work, and thank you for the work of everybody on your teams and across the whole enterprise that have lent their goodwill and intelligence and expertise to making this all of this happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Spurgeon. Okay, two things. I think we potentially have a parking lot item, and again, I think that will be sussed out through a workshop that we'll do, as we discussed last month. We will do second quarter of next year. Maybe Javier, I saw maybe a physical hand.
Yeah, really quick. Thank you, Director Williams. Great question. I would just point out, I think, the robustness of our strategic directive framework. And I really appreciate the point you're trying to make, which is, hey, some customer owners would be happy and willing to share information for advancement of products and services, right? And I would say that's a fantastic point. I point out probably the friction, the healthy friction that exists between SD12, protecting our information, and SD5, customer satisfaction.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think there's a really good opportunity for the board and staff and management to discuss, is this a customer satisfaction element that would help, right, while still keeping SD12 protection, good cybersecurity, and how do those two work with each other with that natural friction and trying to achieve good customer satisfaction, good information sharing, while at the same time also the highest standards of information protection. So just pointing those two together and something that we can discuss in future settings.
Hop in, Eric.
And I don't mean to belabor the point, but I have mentioned in the past, as we look toward the next few years, when we get and significantly increased ability to have data that facilitates those advanced energy services, I think development of policy prior to that physical and communication infrastructure being in place, I think it'll be really important so that we can take full advantage, both as the utility and provide full advantage to our customers. So that's why I mention it now, is because I foresee a time over the next few years when it will become extremely important for us to have policy that supports those additional types of technologies and enables those. So again, I don't want to belabor it too much, but just additional clarification that that particular change in the physical infrastructure will show us orders of magnitude increase in data availability for those types of advanced services. And that's why I think a policy discussion would be appropriate. Thank you.
Got it. Thanks for underscoring that. Okay. I just want to again thank Kate and the entire team for the work that's that they're doing in this space. This is one of those places where you don't hear or see a whole lot about it unless something goes wrong, at least from a public standpoint. And so the good news is that the public perhaps hasn't heard a whole lot about this particular side of our business, and that's because the work that's happening behind the scenes has been really, really strong. So I want to thank everybody for that exceptional work that's been a continued priority. And I also want to emphasize, as Steve Bruckner kind of alluded to, we talk about these risks in much greater detail in closed session for a good reason. And so just for the public standpoint, I want to make sure that they understand that we dive much deeper on a regular basis. Okay. Thank you, Kate. Well done. That concludes this agenda item. Our next agenda item is a claim settlement in excess of $50,000. Board members, just a reminder that by law, any claims in excess of $50,000 need to be reported to the board. And so this is just simply checking that box to make sure that the claim that has been settled, you are all aware of it. I'm going to turn it over actually to Mr. Bruckner. Steve?
And this matter relates to the somewhat infamous case of the pregnant Angus heifer. And that case was concluded with a trial in July, a 2-day trial, before Judge Steinke, a very fine judge in Falls City. My colleague here at Fraser Stryker, Rex Rezac, represented the district in that case. Rex has a great deal of experience and has handled a number of claims for the district over a number of years. Following the trial, the judge issued a very detailed opinion. Just to remind the board of what had transpired with this particular matter, many of you would not be able to relate to it, but maybe you can. In prior classwork, some of the examples that a professor might come up with to teach, this would be like that for a lawyer. A pole falls and causes the death of a very valuable heifer that happens to be carrying a calf at that time. It would be just the type of case that you would discuss in law school. So it's interesting in that respect. This particular heifer was owned by a prominent individual in Richardson County, a familiar name, Charles Herbster, one of his companies, a former gubernatorial candidate. The district accepted liability with regard to this particular claim, so there was no issue there regarding fault. It was solely a case based on damages, how much would be owed. And the case went to trial with the proverbial battle of the experts. The plaintiff, Mr. Herbster, called 2 expert witnesses, a rancher from the West, I believe Montana, and another individual. We had an expert professor from Colorado State, did an excellent job. And the damages estimates from the experts were really, really far apart. Mr. Herbster was seeking about $800,000 in damages. Our experts' evaluation was more in the range of about $120,000, and the court awarded $150,000 and did not award any damages with respect to the calf that the heifer was carrying at the time of the incident, because those damages would be too speculative. So I know the claims group was very pleased with this result. We certainly were as well. We think it's an excellent result. Mr. Herbster, after considering a possible appeal, did agree to accept the award, and the case has now been concluded. That completes my report on this matter. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Bruckner. Any questions, colleagues? I see head shaking no. Box checked. This has been reported. Thank you very much, Steve.
Thank you.
Director Wagner, that concludes the Governance Committee's report. Thank you.
All right, thank you. The next up, we have Finance Committee. Director Yoder, will you provide the Finance Chair report, please?
Thank you, Director Bogner. When we met, if you can see the agenda for our meeting. We merely introduced a report that will happen in just a minute on the electric system revenue bonds. We had a longer report on the excess expenditure authorization. Some Q&A happened there because that will be an action item. And then the bulk of our time, we did not actually, during our committee meeting, cover item 5 SD2 rates and SD3 amendments. I have asked subsequent to the meeting and emails my other finance committee members to look at some language and provide input and be prepared to discuss it in November. But we spent the bulk of our time on a report that's available to other directors and diligent. A report, by that I mean a PowerPoint presentation of a 5-year outlook and 2023 rate proposal slide deck. I have had some follow-up clarifying questions that I've asked CFO Bishop, and thank you very much, sir, for your welcoming of those questions, and that has been done with full clarity to the other finance committee members. Other board members are welcome, of course, to look at that same PowerPoint presentation. The kind of the genesis on this is something we've been discussing for some time, Mr. Bishop and I and other members of his team. It's last year, and I guess with the discussion even of power with purpose, but certainly last year at the COP review. It's clear that our organization, like all utilities, spend a great deal of time looking into the future and understanding what loads are going to be and what kind of generation requirements are going to be required to meet those multi-year views of what's going on. The board, at least, and I know the finance teams have been looking at this, but the board at least has been relatively limited in its view, just looking at the 1-year budget, the corporate operating plan. And so earlier this year, Mr. Bishop and I talked about how we could lengthen the view that's available to board members. And so that's what's in diligent, and it was, I thought, just a crackerjack presentation of information and allowing the finance committee to have a look and get a better sense of where things are headed, not just next year, but in years following. Now, having said that, the Inflation Reduction Act is going to change everything, but it does give us a really great view and a better sense for board members to be more fully aware of kind of the two things that give us that sense of direction. We have our plans for generation, and then we have the financial plans that are available. So that's my sense of what went on, and there were great Q&A. Mr. Bishop, I certainly want to allow you the chance to correct any misstatements I may have made at that point, or other finance committee members to share their views of our discussion on October 7th. First, other board members. Any other reflections on that 5-year view that we got? I'm not seeing anything from that. Mr. Bishop, yeah, I see you having a question, Eric, but we'll let Mr. Bishop give his sense of how that discussion went and the presentation.
Thank you, Director Yoder. No, I thought it was a great conversation. We talked about this going back to Q1 of this year when we were putting together the work plan. And so relative to the request that was made and the information that was provided, I think it was hopefully very informative. You highlighted the importance that this has to our business. You know, we're dealing with investments that are 30+ years. Our customers, our bond holders, they want to see a longer term view of what's going on. And so that's why it's such an important piece of what we do in the planning process. So happy that we were able to provide that view, and would ask if anyone else had additional comments.
You asking your team right there?
Or the board members.
None from those who were participating. Mr. Williams.
Yep, I just wanted to offer appreciation for this type of work. I know we've talked about in the past, specifically in the overlap between the financial projections and the resource planning projections that are generally handled through reports in the systems committee. I think it's critical that those two are both presented and that the board has a full understanding of how to work together to point to work. So I appreciate this to continue development of future projections reported so that we can understand how that influences other policies and other decisions the board makes. Thanks very much for putting this together.
Thank you.
Other comments on that agenda item? Again, that presentation, if you haven't had a chance to look at it, is available on Diligent. Okay. That's what happened. Let's go ahead and go back to this meeting's agenda and take a look, Mr. Bishop, at one reporting item followed by an action item. Let's start with the reporting on the electric system revenue bonds.
Fantastic. Good morning again. I'm happy to report on the results of our 2022 bond sale. Again, this report's going to be short. It won't do justice to the level of work that's gone into this from a district's perspective. But again, I'm excited to provide the results. Just as a background, the board authorized the sale back in April of 2022. So April of this year, we completed the pricing on September 7th and then completed the sale with proceeds being received on October 4th. We had, if we could actually, I apologize, could we advance forward one slide? Let's go back, if we could, a couple slides. Maybe the sequencing's off. All right, then let's go forward. I apologize about this. Keep going. Another slide. Keep going. Let's see here, one more. Okay.
Yeah, I see it in the deck that we've gotten back at the beginning where you thought it was.
Yeah.
I don't. So the one just prior to that.
I could share my screen.
I think it is important that we see this information, yes, if we're going to report on the electric system revenue bonds activity.
Okay.
Thank you for the offer, and I understand.
Okay.
Magic is happening.
There we go. We got to be nimble. Can folks see the reporting item sheet? Fantastic. Okay. All right. So we had two different bond series, the 22As and 22Bs. As part of that, the 22As were issued in the amount of $351.5 million par. They have a final maturity of 2052. we were able to achieve an average rate of 4.53%. Those will be used for our capital expenditure program, reimbursing for previous expenditures incurred plus future expenditures, and that's largely associated with our Power with a Purpose projects. We also had the Series 2022B, which is in the amount of $69 million par, with a final maturity of 2035. Average rate received on that was 3.16%. And what we will utilize those funds for was to pay down $75 million of our commercial paper or short-term debt program. We've also attached the executed pricing certificates, so details of the sale. And then we also have an opinion from our financial advisor, Barclays, where they will review and confirm that we did receive a competitive rate in the current market. And again, folks can find those just behind. Here's the pricing certificate. Additional details there. And then we have the opinion that comes from Barclays. A couple items from that were noteworthy. Again, just really appreciate the nimbleness of the organization. We had originally planned to complete the issuance in June. That was within the 2022 COP. That was the original assumption. With the delay in some of the Power with a Purpose projects, which we've talked to the board about in the past, and our existing cash position, we were able to delay the issuance. And that was delayed until the mid-September. I did want to note some additional value that was created by the team in light of what was coming relative to perceived rate increases from the Fed, and then also some market activity. There were a number of large additional issuances which would be hitting the market and potentially take attraction away from our issuance. In the second week of September, John Thurber and his team did a fantastic job, called an audible and said, let's move it a week forward. And keep in mind the amount of paperwork and effort that takes is very noteworthy to advance that forward a week, and the coordination across all the different councils to get that and underwriters was quite significant. As a result, we were able to achieve a savings. We asked Barclays to capture that for us. It was about 10 to 15 bips, which is 0.1 to 0.15%. But keep in mind, you're talking about an average rate of 4.3%. So everything we can do to keep rates low for our customers is our goal. And so I just want to really commend the group for doing that. As I step back again, great work by John Thurber, John Petrulis, their teams, the FP&A group, corporate planning, legal, and really it was across the district, really just a fantastic job. A ton of work going into updating the forecast, working with rating agencies, working with to develop the preliminary official statement, which goes out with the issuance, and then just a ton of work with the underwriters, underwriter council, bond council, disclosure council. So just a lot of work and a lot of appreciation of the efforts to get us where we were at the 4th of October, when we were able to finally receive the proceeds and call everything complete. Any questions that folks have on the sale?
I can't see at the moment any hands raised. If you have one raised, go ahead and chime in. Thank you very much for, oh, go ahead, Director Surgeon.
Mr. Bishop, your audio broke up a little bit during your explanation. So I think I heard you say that the sale was originally planned for the second week in September, but you moved it forward to make it more advantageous for the district. Is that accurate?
That's correct. That's correct. We looked at what was going on relative to potential Fed interest rate increases, and then also just the amount of other issuers that were going to be in the marketplace. And we saw that it would be an elevated market relative to the number of transactions that were expected to happen in the second week in September. So we moved that forward to the first week. And then from there, that's where we had captured that basis point spread when we look at what the average issuance price was in the second week versus comparing that back to what we were able to achieve. And that's where we've come up with that additional basis point savings.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? see mine out there in the chat. I think really we're so well, we're lucky and blessed to have the team working on this that we do have. And so thank you very much for the reporting on this. No action required. Can we move on? If you're good with that, we move on to the next item.
For sure. And I'm going to keep up my copy.
Maybe it. Go ahead. You were saying?
I didn't see this on the in the deck that was being viewed, so I'm going to go ahead and keep my version up if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
And we'll be looking for, this is an item that we're asking for action. So seeking authorization from the board to increase our level expenditures for 2022. More specifically, when we look at the COP that was approved back in December, the 2022 COP had authorized expenditures of $1,822,000,000. Now that we're 3/4 of the way through the year, we're asking to increase the level of expenditures by $116.2 million, which would increase the total authorization to $1,938,000,000. And I'll walk through specifically what's driving that. Just as a background, this isn't abnormal. A question had popped up in the Finance Committee. Well, how frequently does this happen? Team did a great job. They went back and pulled the information. We've done this 4 times in the past 4 years. So in 2022, which is the year we're in right now, and I'll walk through what's driving that. When you look back at 2021, we actually had 2. The first was associated with the polar vortex, so increased pricing that we for expenditures on purchase power and fuel. And then we also had one that came through in December associated with the Deborah transfer. We did not have one in 2020, and then if you go back to 2019, we also had authorization for $50 million, and that was because of purchase power volume. So not an abnormal request.
Really quick, Deborah, decommissioning and benefits reserve account, just for the public. Those of us who speak that lingo, it's okay, but just clarifying for the public.
Yeah, thank you, Javier. And that was the transfer we were making into the pension account. So with that, let's walk through it in a little bit more detail. So I'm going to click us forward into a summary where we've captured effectively a breakdown of expenditures by line item between the COP and our current forecast, and with variances highlighted. So what's really driving this in 2022? And it's largely associated with what we've experienced in the past, which is increased commodity prices. So market prices have come up for power and natural gas. If we look over here, I think I've got the luxury now of having control. You can see there's $130 million for fuel costs and purchase power. Purchase power is roughly $86 million of that, and then fuel expenditures is $44 million to get us to a subtotal of $130 million. As we go down, we can see that there's a number of different smaller pluses and minuses, but those largely offset one another. From a capital expenditures perspective, it's worthwhile to note that reduces our level of expenditures by $70 million, and that's associated with the delay in our power at the purpose projects. I just mentioned that as part of the debt issuance as well. So end of the day, when we total that up, and again, this is our year-end projection, shows that we'd be $60 million over compared to what we have in the COP. As a result of that, we still have 1/4 of the year in front of us, some uncertainty around that. So we've asked for $50 million of contingency. So it's 10% general contingency, and then a $50 million contingency associated with power purpose considerations that may be coming our way. Again, we will not spend those dollars, but we don't also want to come back. This would be all driven by what would ever come our way relative to market pricing. But that would get us to a total request of the $116.2 million that I had highlighted. I also want to take us back for a moment.
You want to pause there, or is this a good continuing point?
This will be quick. I just want to wrap up with the fact that the mechanism that we've got in front of us and the requirement for the board to approve our expenditures does not take into account our off-system sales. And we've got that captured here. Our current off-system sales we're looking at favorable off-system sales to the tune of 106 million. That doesn't get captured as part of this exercise, but that offsets that 116 million that we're requesting as an increase. So I think it's important to note as we think through what the request is, I want to provide confidence to the board that we're not seeing degradation from a financial perspective relative to our debt service coverage, our key metrics. And again, we've got that requirement where we just specifically look at one side of the ledger, which is expenditures. We don't look at the other offsets, which one needs to always keep in mind what's driving in the marketplace, which does impact our off-system sales. An item that we might think about modifying in the future, so we don't have to routinely come back. And again, that would be at the will of the board. But again, I wanted to go through these numbers with you in a little bit more detail. We're seeking, again, authorization to increase our level of expenditures from $1,822,000,000 to the $1,938 million as highlighted here. Would open it up for questions.
Yeah, thanks. I just thanks to the team, by the way. Well, many thanks. So good catch on the note on the off-system sales. Really appreciate having reminding us to look at both sides of that. During the committee meeting, the question came up. Thanks to your team for finding out that this kind of request had happened several times in the past. I think a second element of that question in the meeting was, I'll put it in my terms. When I came on the board, we were describing OPPD as almost $1 billion a year organization, and this is closer than to $2 billion. So, in a relatively short period of time, that's a doubling, almost, not quite. So, if you'd care to describe that, or discuss that a little bit, I think that question might be out there, not just by any one board member, but if you could share with the public some of what that means or what that observation may be based on.
Sure. And I'm glad I still have control of the slide deck. It makes it pretty quick and easy. So when we look at, what's going on within our business, our industry, we're continuing to see the inflationary impacts that's impacting our purchase power, our fuel costs. One of the major drivers that we've got for us is when you look back at our historical capital expenditure levels, they're in the 150 to 250 range annually. And now with the investment that we're making for Power with a Purpose, as we look at technology in the future, that's where we see this large increase. If you ever were to reduce this by, $400 million, you'd see that we're down in the $1.4 million range. And again, we've continued to grow our business with time. So we've got increased customers, increased revenues as well. Those all come with cost to provide service. So hopefully that's helpful as we try to get our arms around some of the more macro changes that have happened financially to the level of expenditures and revenues that we're dealing with now.
And if I may, Director Yoder, and great answer, Jeff. I completely agree with that. And I think the other one is just really reflecting the growth that we're seeing in our service territory, right? And a portion of that is operating revenues and the operating expenditures that come with that. The other one is, as Jeff noticed, is we have to build new facilities, new assets. It's responding to the fact that we have aging assets that will be retired at some point in the future, and new assets that we're building. So I wouldn't say we are a $2 billion organization from an operational perspective. A big portion of that is capital, but at some point we will be that type of organization, because again, it's responding to that growth, very healthy economic growth that we're seeing in the region.
Great points. Thank you, Javier.
Yeah, no, that's excellent. I appreciate clarification there. The other thing, while we're on this slide, that 70 million, that is the variance there in capital expenditure. That's a savings for right now. It will be spent, because it's tied up with Power with Purpose. When we talk about the need as we're growing, I'm hoping that fuel cost variations, that risk will go down. as we start to generate more and more from renewables that have. But Javier, I see you shaking your head no. So tell me why I'm wrong.
My body language betrays me. Really important, Dirk. I think from a fuels perspective, you're absolutely right. Right, we would have more generation coming to us without the fuel cost. But if you remember, part of the purpose assets also include gas generation generating facilities. The reason I was shaking my head is because we will also be subject to purchasing power. So the purchase power piece of the equation remains a very volatile one, and will continue to remain volatile as the industry transforms. Having all the advent of renewable generation makes markets volatile. So while I appreciate the future of having less facilities that rely on coal expenses, we have to be very open, eyes wide open, that we will also be subject to a lot more market volatility on the purchasing power side of the equation. Brad, anything to add in there?
Yeah, I think you got the big picture well as usual. The only thing I would say is if you followed along last month when we did SD9 monitoring, we talked about that on-peak exposure, and we talked about the district's fervent effort to secure more solar resources to make sure that we are, one, hedged against the market, but two, we have local reliable electricity. And so I just want to draw a connection to Mr. Fernandez's point this month to last month and our ongoing efforts to source more generation to make sure that we give our customers the historical level of predictability that they're used to. We're not immune from what you read in markets, what's going on in the energy space. We are not immune from any of that. But because we operate reliable generation within a competitive marketplace, we're able to de-risk a lot of this for our customers, and we want to continue to do that. So thank you for the ability to make the comment.
Thank you both very much for your input there. Mr. Williams, I see you have your hand raised.
Yeah, following on the discussion about the volatility, we are projecting through the end of the year here, and perhaps someone can comment about the anticipated volatility in fuel prices. There is significant discussion about international geopolitical relations causing volatility in the gas market specifically. So I'm anticipating that our projections through the rest of the year include some expected potential volatility there. Can someone comment about how we are anticipating that volatility in the fossil fuel expenditure, fuel purchase category?
Yeah, so what we do is we take a forward look at what would be, how the system would be dispatched, and then ultimately what the associated market prices would be. So our best indication is going to be whatever the market has at the point in time that we're putting together the forecast. So when we look at these numbers, they will incorporate roughly 3/4 of actuals plus 1/4 of dispatched results against what the market is telling us at that point in time. So that's always our best indicator, is whatever the market's putting forth. We don't try to specifically better influence those outcomes. Again, we see that as the best practices to point to market. But what we do have here is we do have the $50 million of contingency. So above what's being shown relative to market price, we've included $50 million for potential fluctuations that might come forward relative to purchase power price modifications. And I'd open it, I don't know, Brad, if you have any additional thoughts on the corporate planning side of that, again, how we use the dispatch model and forecast.
Yeah, you hit it well. The only small comment I would make, just to affirm Director Williams' comments, we do see elevated pricing here. We will continue to see that. And we'll continue to manage it like we did through the first 3 quarters, blunting any sort of negative impact to customers as best we can. But otherwise, Mr. Bishop described it quite well.
Thanks, Brad. Hopefully that's responsive to your question, Director Williams.
Okay, unmuted again. I don't see any other hands up. Last call for directors' comments or questions. Mr. Bishop, can you land on the action item resolution language there? Is that what you've done? Yeah. So this will be an action item for Thursday night. And that's it, I think, for the Finance Committee report.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Oops. All right. We are going to now move on to systems management and nuclear oversight. Director Williams.
Great, thanks very much. I don't see slides on the screen right now, but I have it in front of me. So I'll begin the discussion about the systems meeting that occurred. We talked about several topics. One of them was the Nebraska City Station operational update, which was discussed in closed session this morning. We talked about the SD7 Environmental Stewardship Monitoring Report, which will be discussed here in just a little while. And then during the committee meeting, thank you. We also discussed the Southwest Power Pool Supply Adequacy Working Group, and I think the committee members found that to be a valuable update about the way in which we engage with SPP and the way in which SPP is updating policy to prepare for the clean energy transition, more renewables coming online, the recognition of the value of efficiency and how that can help to balance the demand with the availability of supply. So I found that information very helpful. There's no particular action associated with the SPP engagement at this time. This was informational only, and I believe that information, the presentation saw, is available also to other directors. I think perhaps there was just one or two slides, but if other directors who are not in the systems committee have questions, I'm sure that staff would be able to provide some additional clarification or elaboration on the way in which we engage with SPP. Again, we know that is critical to the development of new resources, and so I appreciate that report being provided to the systems committee. So with that, we have several operational action items to discuss today, and then we'll get to the SD7 monitoring report. So the first one on the action item list for today, we've got a agenda. Let's see. There we go. Well, perfect. So with that, I will pass it to Troy for the first action item today.
Thank you, Director Williams. And yeah, we definitely have a few items to go over today, all of which are relevant to providing reliable service to our customers. And this first one is falls in that bucket. It's for a grading contract. And can I ask, I think, Christy, can we go to the next slide? There you go. And so what this is for is we need to build a new substation up in our Bennington area. And this is to support residential growth in that area. We see a lot of new houses going up, a lot of new subdivisions, things of that nature, and with that comes additional load. The new substation would be a 161 kV substation. And, you know, the scope of this contract includes things like grading, seeding, soil stabilization, stormwater work, rock placement, things of that nature. So pretty much all encompassing when it comes to preparing a site for a new substation. And I'd say, considering the amount of construction that's taking place here in the Omaha area, we've been very happy about the responses that we've received for this. So we see 3 proposals. All 3 were legally responsive, 2 were technically responsive. The one that did not meet the technically responsive nature wasn't able to meet the desired delivery date, but I'll say that the bids were all very competitive in nature. The grading for this would take place in October of 2022, so this month, and conclude by the end of the year. As we looked at the proposals, the one from Valley Corporation was evaluated to be the lowest and best bid. We have used Valley before. I think the board probably remembers they've done some pretty nice work for us. They're a local company. We have a good track record with them. So for this first item, we are asking the board to authorize the award for the grading contract to Valley Corp. And with that, I'll ask if there's any questions.
I don't see any hands, and I don't hear any questions or comments here. The information was included in diligent for review, and as Troy described, pretty straightforward. So with no questions presented now, I think we can assume that this will move forward as an action item for approval on Thursday.
Thank you. Christy, can you move forward? All right, this next item is a labor services contract for replacement of some tubing, steam tubing in our Nebraska City Station 2. And I think we have a picture later on to show, but basically these tubes carry the steam. They see a lot of expansion and contraction, you know, as the facility ramps up and ramps down. This is the first time this section has needed replacing. And thus, after inspecting the facility, we deem that it's time for us to start changing those out in this particular space. Can you move to the next slide? I think we have a picture. So as you can see, kind of the to the right is what those tubes kind of look like, and the highlighted section that you see to the left is really, you know, where these tubes reside within the boiler. And so it's specialized work, which is why we're looking to go outside. There's special welding needed for these types of tubes. Our internal resources are also focused on other work streams during the outage. So this will take place during kind of a normal outage period next spring. 3 bids were received. All were legally responsive. 2 were deemed to be technically responsive. 1 was not. The reason that the one company was deemed to be non-responsive is they were not able to demonstrate the capability to complete the project. They had mentioned they were subbing out 80% of the work, which is pretty significant without the details needed to know that they could be successful in that space. So in this particular instance, the installation of the OPPD supplied materials will be performed in the spring of 2023 during that normal maintenance outage. And you know, the organization that we've selected who has the best bid is Total Western. They've done other projects for us in the past, solid work, very responsive. We've had good relationships with them. They're based out of California. And so with that, we are asking the board to authorize the award of this contract to Total Western. Any questions?
Okay, and I don't see any hands raised. I don't see any visual signals from the video, and I don't hear any comments or questions. So I appreciate this. This is labor only. Troy, you did mention that it would be OPPD supplied materials. So should we anticipate a separate action item in the future for procurement of the materials for this repair? Or I apologize, maybe that has already occurred.
I'll let Scott speak to that if he's on.
Yes, Director Williams, Scott Edom, Director of Engineering Services for Utility Ops. The material and the tubing was awarded in May by the board. So that material will be supplied by OPPD and installed under this contract. So that's previously awarded.
Great, thanks very much. The specific names of various parts of various units makes it a little difficult to track exactly when that occurred, but thank you for the reminder. I do see a hand from Director Molhoff.
We cannot hear you.
The hand went away. So there you are.
I clicked the wrong button. So this bidder is from California. Scott, do they typically bring all of the workers in from California to do the work, or do they contract with local organizations to get workers to fulfill the contract? Can you just give a sense of what you've seen before?
Yes, Director Molhoff. In this case, where, as Troy alluded to, some of the specific welding is somewhat specialized for these tubes. So they may bring some of their, what I've seen in the past, they do bring some of the labor, but they may also supplement from local. I don't know specifically for this. I can find that out, but typically I've seen kind of a mixture for labor installation contracts. And I've just received a notification it will be a mix. So my team's listening and helping me out.
Great. Sounds like that addressed the question from Director Mulhoff. I don't see any other hands raised. Don't see anything visually, don't hear anything. So similar to the first item, it sounds like this will move forward as an action item for the agenda on Thursday. Appreciate that. Next, I believe we have an update about Nebraska City Unit 1. Some of that back and forth about description of different parts of different units. So Troy, tell us about Nebraska City, this part of Nebraska City Unit 1.
Yeah, just for context, a lot of these units have over 190,000 pieces and parts to them, so it's hard to keep them all straight sometimes. So for this particular item, we are looking for a materials and services contract to replace or repair. Basically, it's a valve within the facility, a very important valve. It maintains or manages the flow of steam. And so if the valve doesn't work correctly, it can cause pretty substantial damage to the generator, or the turbine, which is why we need to make some work here. We are actually requesting, I'll mention this up front, we'll hit it again later, the ability to negotiate for this particular contract as we have on some of the other generation contracts in the past, due to the nature of it being a very specific, very unique piece of equipment that tends to be a proprietary in nature for the original manufacturer. And so after some depth of inspection, as part of our asset management program, we continue to inspect different parts of the units, somewhat annually. Some of it's not annually, just depends on what parts we're looking at. But it's really important for us to do that to monitor the health of the equipment. And in this particular case, during one of the recent reviews, we've deemed this piece of equipment ready for replacement or repair. This work can be performed during a normal outage window, just like many other maintenance activities that we do during our spring outages. And I will say the age of this part is original, so it has not been replaced before. So it's been serving us quite well since 1979, and so we like to see that type of duration out of the assets we have. The district's engineer has certified the use of sealed bid is impractical in this nature, due to the technology. It's complex, it's different, and it's specific to Siemens and their construct. So we are asking for the ability to be able to negotiate and enter into a contract with Siemens for this work. And with that, I'll open it up to questions.
We've talked about a couple different types of contracts or approvals today. So this is negotiated for materials only, or this is negotiated for materials and labor?
Materials and labor.
Great. Appreciate the clarification there. I do not see hands, do not have any visible signal. So with that, we're getting a chance to look at every different portion of the types of operational approvals today. Glad to have them all back to back to back so quickly. And it sounds like all of this is planned during normal spring outages in 2023, correct?
Yes.
Okay, great. Appreciate that. So without any additional questions here, this item also sounds like it is ready for action item approval on Thursday. And we have one more operational action item from Sarpy County now.
Perfect. Thank you. Yes, on this last item, we are looking at Sarpy County Unit 4 specifically, the power turbine related to that. And this contract will mainly be labor. There will be some materials involved with it, but most of it is labor related work. This is another example of how the inspection process that we have really reviews our assets, looks for extent of condition, diligently looks through all the pieces and parts to make sure that they're in a good state of condition. And in this particular case, as we looked through it and performed our inspections, we found that there was a degraded condition for the power turbine. As an example, the last time that this was overhauled in this particular area was 2006. So it's been a little bit since we've had to perform that. So the wear that we've seen is pretty normal for the age of the unit and the time frame between the last overhaul. So it's nothing out of the ordinary. That piece of equipment has been removed from service until it can be prepared, which basically allows us to be able to run half the unit from a capacity standpoint while this other piece is being worked on, which is unusual to some extent. I mean, it's kind of uniqueness of these peaking facilities we have here at Sarpy, where we have the ability to decouple and continue to work on part of the equipment while the rest of the unit's still there. The original manufacturer is Mitsubishi Power, and they have the tooling, the proprietary parts, and the expertise to perform this work adequately for us. And after thorough consideration, the district's engineer certified that this work is proprietary in nature and that the OEM is really the only available option for us to complete the work. So this is another example of an engineer's certificate where we're looking for the ability to negotiate and enter into a contract directly with Mitsubishi Power Aero LLC. And with that, I'll ask what questions may come up.
Okay, a different type of equipment, a different type of repair, but familiar process negotiated with an OEM. I don't see any hands. I don't hear any clarification about the unique characteristics of this unit, in that we can continue to operate half of the unit while we repair the other half. We talked about that a little bit in the past, but that's an interesting feature of this unit. Director Molhoff, I do see a hand from you.
Yeah, so I just wanted to clarify from the last Nebraska City Station 1 unit, 1 turbine intercept value. In the engineer's certificate, it says that they recommended that it be repaired or replaced by the end of 2022. Is this going to be an additional outage, or will that be in the spring outage? I just wanted to clarify because the last statement was that all of these were going to be at the spring outage.
Scott, can you remind us of the schedule?
Yeah, so Director Molhoff, it's an excellent question. So the Siemens has assisted us with the inspections that occurred in the spring, in which we conducted interim repairs on those components, as well as this fall when we had a forced outage due to a tube leak. And so that's really what necessitated the replacement. And again, per their assessment, that is high risk based upon the function of the valves, as Troy alluded to. So we are pursuing both 2 potential avenues that we plan to address with Siemens for either a refurbishment of existing or purchase new. Each of those have different schedules, but that negotiated contract will allow us to find the best value for the district to match our schedule. And then once we understand that, we will schedule the outage next spring for replacement. Based upon the information that we have right now, the timelines won't support replacement this fall, so it'll be in the spring. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
And just to make sure we're abundantly clear, that was related to the past item on Nebraska City 1, but only because someone said something about all of the outages being in spring of 23. Okay. Back to the Sarpy County Unit 4 power turbine item. I don't see any additional questions. Again, this is negotiation for the work, and due to the specialized nature of the work, that's why that's recommended. Okay, I think that's sufficient time for anybody to raise. So, as with the others, we expect this to be an action item for approval on Thursday. Thank you, Troy. I think that covers all of the various operational action items that we had for today. We do now have a reporting item for Strategic Directive 7 on environmental stewardship. And I think there's a slide there. It says Jeremy Bowers, but is someone introducing Jeremy, or is Jeremy going to start us up here?
No, I'm going to introduce Jeremy. So I think you're going to be pleased with the progress that OPPD is making in this area. I mean, I think we have a pretty good report for you here. We're going to share some meaningful progress on our journey to help with a cleaner world. And please note that we heard the board, you know, in the last report. I think we had 50 slides last year. We heard the board, and we've streamlined those considerably for this conversation. No less work's been done within the organization, but we've gotten crisper on the message and really hit on kind of the higher points as we walk through this. This year we do have Jeremy Bowers, who's our Director of Environmental and Regulatory Affairs, here to present this data. You know, OPPD is further evaluating our focus in this area, and we're in the process of selecting a Vice President of Sustainability and Environmental Affairs. So likely you'll see that individual present this in the future as that transition takes place. We do have, you know, a pretty tight time frame to work through this, so I would ask, if at all possible, if we could keep the questions till the end. Some of your questions may be answered as we walk through this. But I think we're all pretty proud of the work we've done here. It's been kind of an all hands on deck across the organization in this space. So with that, Jeremy, I'll turn it over to you for the presentation.
Thank you, Troy. Good morning, everybody. It's an honor day to speak about Strategic Directive 7, environmental stewardship, and how the district's striving to deliver on this important part of our mission. But as I was reflecting on that thought, though, I also thought it'd be an honor to speak today about the attention, effort, and focus that the district makes to keep our rates affordable, or the great work that's going on to ensure the reliability and resiliency of our electric grid. So ultimately, right, it's an honor to speak to you about the mission of public power. But you could say, and I do often, those that know me, that there's nothing more public than our shared resources and how we judge our stewardship of those. So I want to acknowledge here, Troy mentioned it at the beginning, this monitoring report is a product of contributions from employees and teams across the district, because the work represented here is truly an enterprise-wide effort. But we start, as we move to the next slide, if we could, Christy, with where we've come from. This slide is where we memorialize the ongoing but evolving focus in the way the board gives direction to staff on environmental stewardship. We'll walk through the entirety of the strategic directive in a moment, but you see here the revisions over time are very much focused on how our generation portfolio impacts the world around us. I think the last two revisions, if you look at those, the one made just last week or last month, combined with the previous revision, those are an illustration really of what we have in front of us. Recognition that decisions we make at a very specific and local level are part of a bigger picture when thinking about our shared impact on the environment. So moving to the next slide, Christy, we see laid out here the language of SD7 on the next slide, thanks. At this point, this can be considered a legacy version of the strategic directive. As I just described, SD7 was revised last month to add the additional clause on the North Omaha transition. But we start at the top with the first clause centered on our commitment to continuous improvement in our environmental performance. Next, the very clear mandate to strive for net zero carbon by 2050. The following clause is focused on meeting all regulatory standards, going beyond those where we can. And we've committed in the next clause to transparency around our environmental performance. Moving to the next, they're the two people icon there. As we talked a lot about during the decarbonization work, as public power, we recognize the importance of engaging our customers and stakeholders in this work. And finally, we're to constantly work with our local, state, and federal jurisdictions to promote structures and environments that can help further our mission. As we move through these slides here this morning, you'll see a brief heading indicating which clause we're focusing on, along with the associated icon in the upper right corner. So thanks. On this next slide, we begin with a focus on our core business and how our generation fleet here is changing as we strive for this continuous improvement. So you read there in the orange banding, the first clause, OPPD shall operate in an environmentally responsive manner and strive for continuous improvement of its environmental performance. We saw a couple of slides ago where we've been with the SD7 language. This slide, in my mind, if we could just pick one, is kind of the response to that, the where we've been response to the strategic direction. First, a description of what we're seeing here. We have in the foreground the dark orange, and on the left axis, data on our renewable percentage of retail sales over time. We include this, or we choose to represent our performance in this way, as this was the metric used in the original SD7 issuance, stating that a long-term goal of at least 30% of retail energy sales should be supplied from renewable energy sources. So despite the changing language of the SD over time, we do find this helpful to capture a true longitudinal look at these changes. As you see here, we exceeded that original goal by 2017, and in 2020, we're approaching close to 40%. In the background, the solid orange shading, and on the right axis is data on our overall cumulative renewable nameplate capacity. This is a new element to the way we're presenting the material this year. It highlights some important context for the way we understand the approach and our performance. You see the various jumps from year to year when we've added this type of capacity, most recently with the addition of the Fort Calhoun Community Solar in 2020, but more visible, the jump in 2019, you'll see there, with the addition of the 160 megawatt Shoals wind farm. In total, we now have over 1,000 megawatts of renewable capacity. I should point out that the illustration of capacity here does not include, some of the small details of variations in the WAP allocation each year, but it does highlight the efforts of the district to bring these assets online. And we look forward to future presentations where we'll see the upcoming Platteview Solar 81 megawatt capacity added there in the shading, as well as the eventual balance of the 400 to 600 megawatt solar addition through Power with Purpose. So when you see these two metrics together on the same graph, we should discuss how these move together, but we do see a variation in the actual percentage of retail sales despite the same installed capacity. This is due to multiple factors, including natural variations in wind, as our current portfolio is almost all wind, market pricing and curtailments, performance of other assets on the grid, and load growth. And not just the bottom line load growth, but the timing of the energy needs throughout the year. There's two main takeaways from this slide in my mind. First, OPPD continues to add renewable capacity in support of our decarbonization goals, and the upward trajectory of the percent retail sales metric reflects this. And second, individual years are going to vary despite the same amount of installed capacity. And a diversified generation mix then is an important goal as we continue to grow it. So we strive for continuous improvement here. So we turn on the next slide from our core business to a couple other adjacent areas of focus that fall underneath this operations clause. You see here our report out on OPPD's vehicle fleet. The headline here is the total count of 295 vehicles that are all electric, hybrid, or flex fuel, and we continue to add these as we're able. This number is up only modestly over last year's count of 282, which is an indication of a couple things. One, low-hanging fruit's already been had, right? Those use cases where it makes the most sense and the technology is able to support it. You see that reflected here in the passenger car fleet, generally used for light-duty trips around our service territory. And two, fleet application or procurement right now is difficult. Even as you see a note here on the 11 more on order, even as we were preparing this, our transportation and construction equipment manager, Mike Donahue, reached out to me and said, hey, that order's been canceled. So we continue to make strides as it makes sense and as we're able to procure. Our final highlight under this operations clause on the next slide is a report on our category recycling efforts, which are those big categories specific or characteristic perhaps of our industry. Reported here some basic recycling quantities, which we've typically included as part of this report. This year we've highlighted our transformer oil recycling, which as you can see on the graph had a large spike in 2021. This is due to a substation transformer upgrade project that was undertaken that year. But there's another important driver of the increase in oil recycling that project could overshadow, which is a recent process improvement to contract directly with a new oil recycling vendor, really taking into our own hands this waste stream. Previously, transformer oil had been largely disposed of as a component of a removed transformer, or in other cases with a vendor that we paid to take off our hands. Our investment recovery team identified EMI in Kansas City as both a better financial and environmental option. And this vendor has a process to recycle a significant amount of oil, and they pay the district for that used oil. So moving forward, we expect the volume of oil recycling to balance out something above, but closer to what we saw in 2020. As we move to the next slide, our focus turns to the next clause of SD7 and our strategic focus on decarbonization, which as you see the full clause, the bottom in the orange banding states OPPD will conduct all operations in a manner that strives for the goal of net zero carbon production by 2050. As the board knows, but it's important to document with this monitoring report, the district did complete a significant milestone in May, closing the initiative phase of our Pathways to Decarbonization effort. As the note states here, though, the work continues. We learned a ton, though. As us stepping back, acknowledging that to reach that goal, we needed some foundational direction on how it might be achieved. So I encourage anyone listening to go back to the final report out for a summary of those study findings. If I could summarize where the strategy is right now as it moves out of the initiative phase, it would be to say that it's really taken up a place at kind of the very core of who OPPD is in our community, right? Part of our core business strategy and our identity. An important deliverable out of the initiative was the commitment to perform a greenhouse gas inventory. So moving to the next slide, we see that deliverable for the year 2021. This is a new muscle for us, and we'll continue to learn and grow in the way that this data is used. I'm not going to go into great detail on the difference between each scope, so if you're interested in a refresher on that, I'd point you to the decarbonization project deliverables where it is described in some detail. For now, I'll simply point you to noticing the relative difference in the magnitudes of the three scopes, with our scope 1 emission clearly being the bulk of the impact. There are a few other things I'd like to highlight here, especially as the first report out of the annual inventory. First, notice the inventory is presented in metric tons, which is how the international accounting standards at OPPD, along with the rest of industry, follow for this type of inventory. Next, I want to point out that the methodology is different from the regulatory submittals that we make in environmental regulation world, which are required to be reported in just simply tons, or short tons, as you may know them. So the CO2 emission numbers reported on our website will not be the same as shown here in both what they include and the units used. We do highlight, though, the 30% drop that we've seen in Scope 1 emissions since 2013. And we use that year here to be consistent with the way we understand and talk about our changing emission profile. Just last month, you may recall, we used 2013 as the year against which we measure for accountability around the North Omaha conversion. So on the next slide, we'll focus on these direct emissions and the trends that we're seeing, not just in CO2, but in some of the other emissions considered material for an electric utility. Our intention here is to give a report on the directional trend of our impact. We highlight on the virtual sticky notes there in the foreground our percent reduction since 2013, as again, that was our overall fleet peak emission year. And we seem, again, to be aligning around that as a way to consistently talk about the progress. A few notes on the numbers here in front of us. First, similar to the way we highlighted renewable generation earlier, emissions in an individual year can vary a lot based on planned and unplanned outages, market dispatch, and other variables. But the overall trend is what's important and want to draw the attention to. As you see across the board, steady reductions. I'll also remind the audience that the steep decline you see there in our mercury emissions, shown here, is dropping 87% since 2013. That's due to the addition of activated carbon injection ACI technology to NC1 and North Omaha 4 and 5 in 2016 to meet the mercury and air toxic standards. I'll also remind the audience this information can be viewed anytime on our website, and we update it annually in the February timeframe. So from the inventory and our emissions, we're going to move on to the next slide to another important measure of our Pathways to Decarbonization project, the status of our demand side management and energy efficiency programs. We've condensed a lot of information here into a simple way to view progress, and you can see a notable increase in both demand response and energy efficiency products broken out here along the bottom. For 2022, we currently project a total demand response capacity of approximately 130 megawatts and a total energy efficiency value of over 45,000 megawatt hours. In total, the portfolio is up to approximately 185 megawatts. You see that highlighted here, 185 megawatts of demand side management. This DSM growth continues to be driven primarily through growth in smart thermostats. In 2021, the product was expanded to support Ecobee, Honeywell, and Emerson devices, in addition to Nest, which was supported as part of the original rollout. As you see on the right, the LED light upgrade project has provided substantial benefit for us in this space. This project began in 2019, converting the streetlight system to LEDs, creating a projected annual energy savings of 23,000 megawatt hours, and importantly, an approximately 27% reduction in streetlight maintenance calls. As we saw earlier on the recycling slide, and you see it again here, the right environmental solution has resulted in a really positive business outcome as well. Although not typically included in this type of report because it's handled by a different part of the business than the rest of our energy efficiency efforts, and I should say this project's not included in the 185 megawatt total, we thought it was important to recognize that effort here. From these strategic efforts, we'll move to the next slide and on to the next clause of SD7, which focuses on environmental compliance, reading the full clause at the bottom again in the orange banding, which states OPPD will conduct business in a manner that meets all environmental regulatory standards and goes beyond compliance where practical. First, as a direct answer to the direction of SD7 here, we have remained in compliance with environmental regulatory standards with no permit violations that would result in a fine or enforcement action. We do hold over 30 environmental regulated permits consisting of air, water, waste, and natural resources. We receive regular and quality inspections from our regulators, including the City of Omaha and the Nebraska Department of Environment and Energy. We also have a robust internal environmental audit program that supports our efforts to ensure ongoing compliance in everything that we do. You may recall this audit program was created a number of years ago in our environmental business area, but in 2019 was moved to our corporate audit area to ensure objectivity to maximize the value of the program. I also want to highlight on the slide the PCB sampling project. You see a door hanger there. This is the third year we've included this project during this report. I'm happy to report we should be done by the end of the year. You may recall it's intended to develop a database of transformer PCB levels to assist in prioritization of replacement planning efforts, and we're almost complete. The last two items here under Beyond Compliance are described on the next slide, so we'll move on and highlight work being done in the wildlife and natural resources area. This is an evolving and growing area for the district, and I'm personally really excited for us to mature more into these activities. But first, perhaps a familiar topic. You see here in the middle, the newest generation of the peregrine falcons hatched, and we report on this annually, hatched there at North Omaha Station this spring, which were named Thunder and Lightning in a contest. And while these chicks, they could be seen all spring and summer on the webcam, this year they had to kind of share that spotlight a little bit with the newest webcam stars up at Fort Calhoun Station. You see those on the left. The webcam there was installed on the new Osprey nesting tower, and it had approximately 35,000 views. The new 65-foot tower was conducted in the spring of last year as a replacement for the FCS meteorological tower that had been removed as part of decommissioning. We were really pleased, perhaps somewhat surprised, to have the Osprey return shortly after the nest was constructed last March. And the webcam went live in that spring, or this spring rather, in partnership with the Nebraska Game and Parks. These are really unique birds for the area, so I encourage you to check that out if you can. Also wanted to talk about our Prairies in Progress program, highlighted there on the right. We're really proud of this developing program, especially excited to grow our expertise here in the years to come. The project began in 2018 with the simple goal of reducing ground maintenance costs, showing again the right environmental decision can have positive business outcomes. Originally, this was a partnership with the Save Our Monarchs Foundation, and it now has 331 acres across 13 sites, which are being monitored using a recently developed pollinator scorecard. From here, we'll move on to our next clause, focusing on active transparency. Again, reading the full clause here at the bottom in the orange banding, which states OPPD will be transparent by measuring and reporting environmental performance on OPPD's website. As this audience is fully aware, but most notably, we publish our annual emissions and carbon intensity information on OPPD's fleet emission website. And we looked at that earlier in this presentation, but also published on the environmental report side is information on avian protection, coal combustion, residual compliance, as well as information on energy efficiency and the Prairie in Progress program we highlighted a moment ago. Each of the last few years during this report, we highlighted the amount of traffic the portion of this website gets. This year, and for that purpose, July of 21 to June of 22, the environmental portion of our website had approximately 15,000 page views, with a notable spike in June of this year, presumably due to interest in the North Omaha Station extension announcement. This 15,000 page views are a noticeable increase compared to previous years, which had hovered around 10,000 views. In the foreground here, you see our community solar dashboard, which is a special feature for those participants, but can be publicly viewed. This includes real-time information on current and historical production. Also intended for real-time consumption of sorts is our Community Connect platform, shown on the right side here. We continue to heavily use this platform, and we regularly receive interest from our peers as an industry best practice. We'll move now to our next slide and the next clause of SD7, which turns our focus how OPPD engages our customer and stakeholders in this effort to get better and better. As before, we read the full clause here at the bottom: engage customers and stakeholders to promote energy conservation and efficiency and minimize environmental impact. You know, I started this report earlier describing the efforts to reduce the number of slides, or Troy mentioned that, and to keep the content succinct. But it was really hard to do in this customer-focused clause, as there's so much being done and developed in this area. Both really as a result of the decarbonization program and our focus here, but also the natural outcome of traditional product development efforts, identifying this type of product and program as an area of interest and potential growth for our business. There's a number of efforts we could have chosen to highlight, including our customer-owned generation trade ally program that you've heard about, our interactive EV education program, or Choose Green Charging pilot. Like I said, there's a lot going on here, but instead I thought the headline this year is the revamped Green Power program. This was originally introduced about 20 years ago, but was revamped and reintroduced here in April. It connects community members and organizations to collectively work to build a greener community. Local organizations have the opportunity to apply for funding for initiatives like solar gardens, energy efficiency, beautification, tree planting, sustainability parks. Program's initial community project was completed in July of this year, an edible orchard and a grass or flower pollinator plot at the Arboretum. This was in collaboration with Bellevue University and the Nebraska Statewide Arboretum. I also want to note here the first application period for the audience, if you're involved in organizations, the first application period for projects is now open until October 31st. So from this qualitative description of efforts to engage our stakeholders, we'll see on the next slide a more concrete demonstration of progress to partner with our customers. The amount of customer-owned generation in our footprint continues to grow at a rapid pace, and we're continuously working to improve the process to accommodate this large increase with minimal impacts to customer waiting periods. This is one of my favorite slides in this deck, as this information has been presented in the same format for multiple years, so it really highlights the explosion that we've had in participation. We did update the graph this year, expanding it from 25 to 100 kilowatts or less to match the new net metering threshold of Schedule 483. When we went back and updated the data, including sites up to that amount, this added 9 installations, 6 of which are net metered for a total of 397 kilowatts of capacity. In mid-August of this year, so just a couple months ago, that was a milestone for the district. We received, you see here, our 1,500th customer-owned generation interconnection application. To date, 736 of these systems, totaling more than 5 megawatts, are online and generating electricity for their owners. It can be seen that the majority of installations are residential if you look at the details there. However, the number of commercial installations continues to grow as well, and we're working hard with those interested customers to continue this really substantial growth. And to continue this momentum, we have to have an eye on long-term partnership with our customers, which can only happen with education. So we highlight on the next slide OPPD's early education program, which, as you see here, is a STEM-based education program combining energy workshops for teachers and hands-on activities and lessons taught by our staff. These focus on renewable energy, energy efficiency, and other topics that are really important to the changing energy landscape. The program was really successful this year. Launching back in January, we held 2 teacher workshops, which really teach the teachers about the complexities of the different forms of energy. These occurred with 4 of our rural school districts represented: Dodge County, North Bend, Arlington, and Falls City. You see here in the pictures our energy advisor, Eric Ben Salah, teaching classrooms full of students about solar energy, wind energy, and just broadly about all the different forms of energy sources. These types of engagements, which we continue to get great feedback on from teachers, students, and parents, these are an important part of our strategy to engage and promote as SD7 directs here. And we're focused on continuing to grow this type of engagement with our youth. And finally, turning to the next slide, we turn to another very related portion of the strategy to, as we read in the orange banding, advocate and educate local, state, and federal governments to protect and promote OPPD's environmental impact. I know I don't have to go into great detail with this audience here on how busy OPPD, and as you see here, our CEO, Javier Fernandez, has been to meet this charge of SD7. Staff has worked tirelessly over the last year with our surrounding communities to work for an environment that can accomplish OPPD's generation and environmental goals while meeting the other related needs of the communities that we serve. So in addition to the focus on solar, there's been extensive outreach on Power with Purpose, our PF 2050 vision, our capacity versus load challenges, and most recently and ongoing, the decision to extend coal operations at North Omaha Station. You may ask what some of these efforts have to do with promoting the environmental goals of the district. And what we found is it's really beneficial, it's really valuable that our stakeholders have a general understanding and appreciation of the entirety of our business and its challenges to get to the heart of what we're trying to do with our environmental goals. This is going to continue to be an important part of the strategy for the district because as public power, these partnerships are essential to who we are in the community and absolutely necessary to serve our customers with our full potential and with the full charge that we have from this board. We are intentionally keeping this section of the report here brief, as you'll hear much more about our stakeholder efforts during the SC13 report later today. So we move to the next slide, and which is the recommendation of the Systems Committee to have the board accept this monitoring report for SC7 and further recommend that the board find OPPD to be sufficiently in compliance with board policy SD7. So I want to again recognize the contributions and collaboration of those around the district in both the work presented here and the preparation of the monitoring report. Many of those SMEs are here with us today to help answer questions or further the discussion. So it's truly been an honor to present on this topic, and I'm personally really excited for the work to come. So as we consider this recommendation, I'll ask we move on and pause on the next slide, asking for any questions, gaps, or reflections the board wants to discuss. Thank you.
Great. Thanks very much for the presentation, and especially in the way that we have attempted to restructure monitoring reports and kind of expedite the information. This is, yes, fewer slides than last year, but a comprehensive view of the way in which actions are aligned with the policy. I've got a couple clarification questions to start with. Most timely, perhaps, the Greener Together program was newly initiated, and you mentioned that the application period is open now through October 31st. I've received several questions from the public about projects, and so can you provide some background information about the participation in the program. When that program was initiated, there was a graph of the potential participation time, and I'm not sure if this is a question for Jeremy or if someone from the public information might be able to answer this, but we did talk about a projection for program participation and how that would translate into funding availability. Does anyone have information about those two numbers and how well Greener Together is going?
Director Williams, thank you for that. I will defer to members. I've got a few members of my team on the call, and we'll defer to them for any particulars they may have.
And I realize this was not the topic that I had suggested during the SD7 discussion during the systems committee. And so if the answer is that that update can be provided either by email or by I guess it's just a reflection of this week I've received maybe 3 or 4 calls from people who specifically asked about the program, were uncertain about the available funding and about how applications would be prioritized and then potentially move forward. So that's a little bit of a fine detail, but in the reporting aspect of it, because we had projected the potential participation and in the conversion from the previous program into this program, there was some discussion about not an automatic enrollment. I'm curious how that engagement has gone. So if that's better reported by an update later, that would be great. But just
if you allow me, Director Williams, great point. I'll do my best to provide an update on Thursday during my president's report, and probably allow the team a little bit of time to react to that and maybe present a little bit more robust information. But thank you. Great question.
Great, and I apologize for bringing that up again. The nature of our systems committee discussion was very short, and so I should have provided this ahead of time. I see a hand from Director Spurgeon. If you have a question, please go ahead and jump in.
Not a question, really. This is such a huge report covering so very many areas. I just want to highlight the meet and exceed environmental regulatory standards compliance. A fine avoided is savings gained, and I really appreciate the degree of particularity that this has been approached within OPPD to make sure that we move beyond compliance and just do the very best we can. And some of those graphs really indicated how helpful that has been. So really just want to call that out, and thank you for all of that.
Yeah, Director Moody.
Thank you, Director Williams. This is a really well done report, so kudos on the refinement and tightening up. I found myself screen grabbing a lot of stuff here, so I thought it was really, really well presented. One of the images that struck me the most was the first sort of institutionalization of all of the policy changes that have happened over the last several years. And I want to acknowledge a couple things about that. First is, I know that can be taxing on the organization when the board is viewed as sort of swinging one way to the next and trying to figure out exactly where it's telling you to go. So I want to acknowledge that can be challenging in terms of what it means to the organization and where it needs to go. Although in reflecting on it, I hope it's provided clarity over time to help the organization. So I hope that that's the case. The other thing that I want to acknowledge is, the graphs that reflect progress made over time are really helpful for me as a director to see. And I found myself thinking about the fact that we've maintained great reliability over time, we've maintained great affordability over time. So we can hit all three parts of our mission simultaneously. It's not a zero-sum game. So I don't have a question. I just wanted to acknowledge one that, like I said, the report is really well done, and I appreciate seeing kind of the overtime that helps me as a director sort of reflect on the bigger picture as well. So thank you.
Great. See a hand from Director.
Yeah, I've got a few questions. And I'm, well, I guess my questions will reveal what I'm trying to say, because I don't know that I have a thread for all of them. So early on in the report, you have a slide, slide 54, that says OPPD renewables over time. And Jeremy, I do really appreciate you stating that the genesis of this particular slide is based in part on a previous goal that's no longer around. What caught my attention was the language in the bar at the bottom that says it's intended to be linked to the continuous improvement of OPPD's environmental performance. So the larger or underlying, I'm not sure, question here is how does this relate to environmental performance? How do renewables relate to environmental performance, or how does this metric illustrate that?
Thank you, Director Yoder. If maybe I'll take a first crack at that, right? You know, what I love about this slide, and I mentioned it, is the longitudinal look over years. And I know you mentioned that, which is when you look at any individual year and they bounce around, but you look at the trend and you look at the shading in the background that indicated the capacity, that we continue to add capacity and continue to help be a part of the energy transformation that's happening. And so that's what I see when I look at continuous improvement, certainly, is that longitudinal look. And then I think, you know, the environmental performance piece, right, is we're part of the changing, as we're part of the energy transformation, right, that's helping the tide rise for all of us. So I'll let anyone else jump in, but thank you for that comment.
If I may, and Director, you and I have had many conversations about this topic, and it's a fantastic one, right? And I think it shows the evolution of the conversation that we've had at OPPD and frankly elsewhere in other utilities, where I would say, you know, 7 years ago, in 2015, when this strategic directive was created, there was a lot of emphasis on renewables, right? And we made a lot of progress on adding renewables, and that, very importantly, I think, as Jeremy showed, it's an important tool, and it allowed the board and staff and stakeholders to have a conversation around is a tool what we're pursuing, or is there a different goal, right? And the evolution of SE7 going into yes, let's continue to use that tool of renewables, but let's pivot to carbon emissions, which is ultimately the goal that today we have on SE7, right? And I think I really like that slide that Jeremy showed with the evolution of the directive, of the policy, because it really reflects the evolution of thinking and how we've been building upon each evolution of that, each version of that directive, all the way to achieve that emissions.
Yeah, I think you hit it right, the nail right on the head there. And of course I'm excited about all the renewables that we have, but the very next slide we talk about OPPD's fleet, and I kind of had the same question, and while that I would never ask you to change the slide we were just talking about. This one is one I think could be improved if we talked about you know, numbers of vehicles is one thing, but the environmental impact, you know, our environmental performance is due to the amount of emissions from the amount of fuel that we burn, right? And so that I think that can be a metric that would better reflect our environmental performance. Yes, it's tool versus goal. So we are in accord on this, and I just wanted to highlight an opportunity for him. Kind of, similarly, the recycling materials, I do appreciate that we're seeing more oil being recycled. It's interesting that it's a change in process. Again, I kind of be interested either in a metric of year over year or how a percentage of batteries or metal or oil based on what we purchased. Those I think could give me a better sense of our performance. If we see the reuse volumes or the recycling volumes. So shifting away from those metric discussions, I guess when we talked about our pathways to decarbonization on slide 57, where's my comment here? So I'm anxious for something more detailed, I guess. I do appreciate its foundational work and that we have a completed pathways to decarbonization in May of this year. Director Williams has talked about interim metrics before, and I really thinking back to that last slide, what are our opportunities? When I see this, I think this is the time we can talk about that. Maybe not, but I think that's a real opportunity for an improvement of SD7 as we tie back to all of this. The next slide, 58. I know two of the directors have talked about the book Good to Great by Mr. Collins. And there's a vignette in that book or the one or if not Good to Great for nonprofits, where he talks about how railroads have metrics for shipping. And they would report year over year improvements in their weights and the revenues associated with shipping. And at the same time that was happening, so that was first published back in 2001, so it was kind of before Amazon had a huge impact. But UPS and FedEx and some of these ground transportations were eating up more market share. So while the railroads were increasing, they were losing market share at the same time. And because these competitors were improving. So here's why I always ask for maybe not 58 but 59. Here's why I always ask for how we're doing, not just year over year, but how we're doing compared to other utilities, right? And how we're doing to the market in general. We're seeing a huge shift in the marketplace. And I can't deny that we're doing better. Certainly we're doing better, but so too are other utilities. And so I guess what, as a director, I'm interested in is are our improvements commensurate with what other utilities are doing, or are we like the railroads doing better but not as good as others? And I don't know how we capture that. That's just something that's always in the back of my mind.
Director, if I may,
Yeah,
I
please.
think that's a great comment, right? What do we use? Who do we use as benchmark? And the challenge here is, hey, let's look. Don't just look at yourself and look at how you've improved yourself, but how are we comparing to others? And something that the team takes seriously, and we will consider that. I think it's important also for the public for me to share that the cards that we were dealt with, right? The fleet that we're starting with is very different than other utilities. So as we measure and we try to benchmark, we need to be very careful about how are we benchmarking, right? And making sure that we're pushing ourselves as hard as we can, and at the same time keeping very, very clear the fleet that we have, the reliability that we're trying to protect. So great call for us to do more, and I welcome that comment, and we we'll continue to look at other ways to benchmark and compare and really push us to that excellence that I hear through your comments.
I appreciate you hearing me, and I appreciate your commitment. I very much am thankful for that. Continuing on, slide 60. So I'm curious. It's a sore subject for me. How does this demand side management total portfolio of 185 megawatts, how does this relate to Resolution 6006 of 2014? Are we? Yes, I'm glad we're doing better than we have, but there was a goal set and by a previous board. What's the look forward here, not just the report for where we are?
Director Yoder, this is Tim McAravey. I can tackle that at a high level. So certainly our organization is focused around demand side management as a whole. You'll see more specific information about our forward plans as part of the corporate operating plan. We continue to be focused on driving all the demand side management that we can and that makes sense. I agree with you that a prior resolution carried the 300 megawatt number, and what has since happened is additional studies have refined that number of available demand side management megawatts. So the 185 we think is quite an accomplishment. We do see growth potential, and you'll hear more about that coming forward.
Thank you for the comment. Slide 61, no violations of environmental permits resulting in fines or enforcement actions. I guess, once again, I just think there's an opportunity for improvement on SD7. In my mind, zero enforcement actions, or it does not mean zero environmental impact. I can't say that often enough or stress it enough, period. So I guess I'm almost done. Well, yeah, I'm almost done. I'm really excited about the teaching that's going on. I'm happy that that's happening. I'm wondering if are those in classroom or those out of classroom? A little more description on that. Is there an opportunity for some after school activities that I know are happening up in North Omaha? Some engagement there.
And Director Yoder, so I get a kick out of every time I look at this slide and Eric's pride, not only in the work he does, but his orange jacket. So this activity is primarily centered in classroom right now. So we are out, not focused necessarily on after school programs per se, but we are out actively engaging with different schools, creating awareness about the opportunity this program provides with teachers. As Jeremy reported, helping to educate teachers about the opportunity, and as they've understood it, we're getting a great receptivity there, but focused on in classroom learning.
All right, thank you very much for the clarification. Good stuff. Much better than we've seen in the past. I think there's still an opportunity for growth and refinement. And so plan, do, check, act, as always. Good job.
Great. There were a couple comments that came through there. One, Craig offered an echo to Rick's desire to compare ourselves, not just to ourselves, but to others. And I think that I'll consider that a takeaway for the systems committee to track what things might we see as potential updates to the report in the future. Two, from a policy perspective, I heard some discussion about interim metrics. We did make an update to an interim metric related to carbon emission reductions, and the systems committee has talked most of this year about the potential for a guide resource planning in the future. We've also talked about that being the advanced feasibility studies that are currently being conducted, and so a potential policy update to be considered in the future as we conclude the advanced feasibility studies is kind of where we've left that. I believe the anticipated timeline there is for advanced feasibility studies to be completed by the end of 2023. So I think we should keep that in mind as a timeline for potential of to have policy updates for additional interim metrics related to that technical work being completed. Just wanted to clarify that that is something the Systems Committee has talked about in pretty significant length throughout the year and was updated to the policy prior to this this report, so not currently incorporated into this report. I do mention that because I've heard a couple of comments that echo the idea of projections on where we anticipate things being in the future, and I would offer similar comments in several areas. I appreciate the reporting we've seen about electric vehicles as far as our fleet. I'd be interested in additional detail about where we see that going in the future. I think the same could be true about our carbon emissions. We have made several updates to the policy about carbon emissions, including metrics. I would be interested to see projections in that category as well. Customer-owned generation. The graphic, as Director Moody pointed out, I find incredible. Added a few years ago. I think it is doing an excellent job of conveying that there is a significant demand for customer-owned generation to participate in some of that grid edge distributed energy resource opportunity we talked a little bit about earlier under the information security and availability item. So that is where we have come with the customer-owned generation. I'm curious what we project where we will be going in the future, because the graphic this year does basically reflect a hockey stick of acceleration. Do we anticipate continued acceleration in the future, and what types of policy updates might we need to make? Specifically, the state law related to net metering requires us to allow generation, but as we look to the future, when approach what is required to be authorized under state law, and do we need to proactively consider additional policy updates to continue supporting customer-owned generation in the future? So I think that the graphic and the reporting we've seen here points us in a direction of additional policy investigation for the future so that we can make sure we're proactively prepared for where we're going. Following on the customer-owned generation point specifically, I've made many comments throughout the year about my personal strong support for incentives for customer-owned generation, both specifically to continue supporting energy, also have a footing where we're going. The Trade Ally Program is an excellent step forward. I think that helps guide our customers to who are contractors who are doing high quality work and have high reliability in delivering professional and quality services. Even this last week, I happened to encounter one of the participants from the incentive program that was piloted this year. Just randomly, I ran into them at an event, and they OPPD was the deciding factor in whether or not they would install solar on their home, and the associated information from the Trade Ally Program about who is a qualified contractor delivering quality work was again a deciding factor for them personally to move forward. So not only accelerating and continuing to support the customer-owned generation activity, but also providing guidance in the market. Without an incentive, I'm uncertain why the Trade Ally Program would be something that contractors would wish to participate in, and I'm uncertain how we are providing that certainty to our customers that we are partnering with contractors to deliver quality results. There have been anecdotal stories about how up to the best possible gold standard of performance in our market. We've heard about some challenges with the permitting through the city of Omaha. So I am pretty strongly supportive of incentives being tied to supporting customer-owned generation, and then also to providing guidance on how the market develops. And so I mention all of that because the graphic that we've seen in SD7 does indicate so clearly that there is significant demand. It is increasing, it is accelerating. As we project forward what we anticipate, I view that as an important role of where policy updates would be beneficial. I think a couple of the other areas would also benefit from some projections. The smart thermostat program. Do we have total addressable market, to borrow a term. Do we know how many thermostats we might see in the future? We understand how many we have had. We saw an increase when we moved from just the pilot with one project or one particular type of hardware to more types of hardware. How large do we think that market might get? And I thought I heard Tim say that we could expect some update on the demand side management in the corporate operating plan. So perhaps that's a time when that will be discussed. But again, a projection for where we might be headed, I think would be very valuable. Related to electric vehicles, we talked about our fleets. I think a much bigger impact in electrified transportation across our service territory, because the potential impact to environmental consequence reduction from electrified transportation is gigantic. But it also is a gigantic potential impact to the demand, potentially the peak demand or potentially the total consumption of energy. And are in our market, and how many do we anticipate in the future? I know was a part of the decarbonization study, but perhaps that could be included as part of the SD7 reporting here. With all of those comments, we talked a little bit in the systems committee about how we might move some portion of this reporting to other areas. We have an annual net metering report, which is posted on the website. Perhaps rather than the lengthy discussion that we have during the SD7 monitoring report, perhaps some of this can be moved to something posted online, and there is an opportunity to present that information in another fashion so that we don't end up with too much director commentary and back and forth. So I think that that's an area where I hope the systems committee can continue to work with staff on identifying what portions of this are directly related to the policy language of SD7 and what portions of this might be able to be reported in another way and then reflected in a very brief summary into the SD7 annual monitoring report. I think the net metering report is an excellent example of how that can be done successfully and how it can continue to be expanded in other areas. So that's a string of comments. During the systems committee meeting, I indicated that I would have several of these types of comments. I'm not sure that they're listed at this time, but I do agree that the report presented this year is a significant improvement. It highlights the ways in which we are moving forward on all of the areas outlined in the policy. And I feel like it also points us in the direction of where potential updates might be made in the future and how the reporting can continue to be improved, both in non-monitoring report locations, as well as the way in which the data is presented in the monitoring report. So I hope the systems committee can kind of capture some of that. I've got some work with other directors to make sure that as we look toward the next monitoring report, things we saw here that we felt were successful and what things we felt might continue to be improved for next year's reporting. With that, I heard a couple comments from a couple directors. I don't see hands raised on the participant list, and I don't hear other directors. If you have specific comments or questions, I would encourage you to offer them now. And I don't see any, so I do think we're just a little bit over time. We anticipated that this discussion might run a little bit long, even though we were ahead at the start. We're just a little bit behind. With that, without any additional questions, I think that concludes the monitoring report discussion and by extension, the systems committee discussion. So Chair Bogner, I guess we'll pass it back to you for the exciting next step in our agenda.
Okay, thank you. We're going to take half an hour for a lunch break. We will return at 1 o'clock. Thank you. All right, I have 1 p.m. We'll get kicked off here again with the Public Information Chair Report. Director Molhoff.
Yeah, thank you. So the Public Information Committee met, and all 3 of our agenda items are on the agenda for today. So I'll let Lisa take it ahead.
Great. Thank you so much, Director Molhoff. Good afternoon. Hopefully you all had a great lunch and are a little bit refreshed. We'll kick off public information with our legislative and regulatory update. While we work year-round, and you'll hear a little bit more about that in SD 13, 'tis the season now, as especially after elections, we will be working with talking to some of the new and existing senators as well, and then what's going on with their agendas as well. So with that, Tim O'Brien, I am going to pass it over to you, sir.
Great. Good afternoon. Thank you, Lisa and Chair Mulhoff. It's a pleasure to provide an update to the board and to the public on our legislative work. So, Christy, I believe you're driving the slides. If you want to go to the, skip the next one, I believe. Oh, perfect. This is it. We're going to spend about 5 slides on where we're at, where we're going. And so next month is going to be certainly very busy with elections on November 8th. And so there are 24 seats, nearly half the legislative body, that could change in that election. So 13 are open seats where there is a senator that is term limited. So we know for sure that there'll be at least 13 new members. And then 11 senators are seeking a second term. Some have challengers. And so there's a lot of education that we're doing in that regard. We're meeting with candidates and then those current senators just to connect and answer any questions about OPPD's business interests. So a lot to come. You'll hear from me as kind of our closeout on what's to come. We do plan a detailed legislative briefing for the board that'll include details on each one of the new senators and the body makeup and issues and topics that we believe will be major components of the 2023 legislative session. In addition, there are many other local races and then certainly the governor's race that will occur in November as well. So lots of reporting to come through November. So just wanted to give a data point there as I move into really where we're at with the legislature. If you go to the next slide, Christy, please. This is the calendar. And so working up to the calendar, there has been a few legislative hearings or interim resolutions, if you draw that connection to the topic we've talked about in the past. A few have been scheduled. And again, interim resolutions may or may not mean that much is done or anything is done. It is introduced by a senator or a group of senators that have interest in a particular topic. So I have 3 that I'm going to report on just briefly. One is LR 295. This might be familiar to you. This is the reporting of our pension plan to the legislature. That is scheduled for November 22nd, which OPPD will present and testify, just as we have in years past. So very similar process there. Another one we're taking keen interest in is LR 355. This is looking at Chapter 70 on the operations and really the structure of public power districts. We understand the senator that introduced that is going through doing his research in that regard, and we've had little interaction on that topic to date. So we'll learn more as December gets closer, and that's when reports or hearings will be completed on these interim items. The other one that we've been very active in is LB 1024, and this is the large amount of dollars that are coming to Omaha for North and South Omaha projects. And so there was 4 hearings since our last report. Our team attended all of them, and it was an excellent time to just hear the projects that so many folks are interested in completing in Omaha. And so it gave us great momentum, great interest, great ways that we can help partner or push or support many of those projects. So very excited about that. And the committee has tough work ahead of them on how to prioritize and select projects that come. So that one we're very active in. That does tie into some of our North Omaha outreach related to the North Omaha station, which you'll hear me speak about here in probably 10 minutes or so. So that's a little bit of the work. To date, we continue to meet, like I said, with senators and candidates, and we're preparing for January 4th, which is the start of the legislature. And January 18th is another important date to put on your calendars as well, with bill introduction to be completed there. One other important thing that is different, we will have a new speaker of the legislature, and so the new speaker sets the agenda, and there will also be many different committee appointments. So the makeup of the legislature is significantly changing. So that's the punchline that I wanted to make with this slide, and so we're working up to that. So the next 2 slides give you a sense of what we're up to. So the next slide, here's 3 areas of focus, at least for now, that we're working towards preparing for really what I would say is a 2-year journey. And so the first is broadband. This is a topic that we've been heavily involved in the last couple of years. The last 2 years, we led and managed LB 360, or excuse me, 460, that makes some changes to allow for really the utilization of OPPD's assets for leasing for broadband deployment. It doesn't put OPPD in the broadband business. It just allows us to use our assets for those that are in that business. We have great interest from the public and others in that topic, so we are going to continue that journey in 2023. And then the second is another bill that we've been working on the last 2 years. And the last 2 years, the bill went by LB 512, critical workers. And so we're continuing to work on that bill again in 2023. And then lastly, we've heard from our customers and others and see continued opportunities to seek additional funding or opportunity for weatherization. And so those are 3 of the OPPD legislative priorities. The legislature in general is going to be very busy. And so a new body, new committees, they, as I understand, have a lot of tax-related items that they want to work on. So that will be something that will take quite a bit of time. There's also corrections and other big topics. So there are many items for this new legislature to take up. So that's a little bit of our proactive work. Lisa, I'll pause there maybe if you want to make a few comments on some of the work that we've been doing as well.
Yeah, I want to just say how proud I am of the entire team. And you'll see this in SD13 of the outreach that's happening in each of our communities, because having that support and trust from the elected officials is extremely important. And you'll see also that Javier and the team and all of us have been out on the road visiting all across the service territory as well.
Thanks, Lisa. So that's what we know today. We're going to learn a lot in the next 30 days. So as elections occur, up to November and December, we will start to see more ideas that senators have or others introducing components of policy. So we will keep you informed as we learn more about what may be introduced and as we align more with the industry. And I'll talk about that here on the next couple slides. Next slide, please. So process improvement is one thing we've been working on, and we will continue to provide our bill tracker as part of the board package as part of updates that we send to you. We're making improvements. We had great feedback 2 years ago, and I felt it's time for us and the team to redo the bill tracker. So we'll be doing that. So this is to let you know that we're in the middle of efforts to update it. And if there's any information that you'd like to make sure and receive in your reporting, let Lisa know as we continue to work through this. But we'll have a draft format by the end of next month is our plan. So would love your engagement on that topic. Last slide, Christy. So this is where we're going. As I said, finalizing the elections. We'll put a summary together of those items, finishing the bill tracker, continuing to do a lot of stakeholder and senator outreach across the whole state. The NPA Legislative Subcommittee is an important entity for our government affairs actions, and it's very much the Nebraska legislature. I'm pleased that Seth Boyles is the chair of that subcommittee again this year, and David Dover and Kelly Fleming from my team also support that in a big way. So I just want to tell them thank you, and they are meeting on their priorities as an industry as well. And then lastly, interim hearings that we have interest in or just watching will continue to be scheduled up until December. So that is the runway over the next 30 to 45 days. And that concludes my prepared remarks for today.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Oh, yeah. Lisa, is there anything you wanted to add before I?
No, I just wanted to say thank you to the team, as well as you'll hear in the next report how that parlays straight into our engagement in North Omaha Station area.
All right. Any of my board members or committee members have any comments or questions about this? So, Director Williams, go ahead.
You mentioned LR 355, and it sounds like no engagement yet, but are we anticipating a hearing on that, or do we expect that just to be a report?
Tim, would you like to answer that?
Director Williams, great question. I believe it'll be a report. Not sure on what other steps will occur, if there'll be a hearing or input from us. Just not sure. We know the senator's told us he's working on it, and more to come when we learn more.
And the industry is looking for an answer for that as well, Director Williams.
All right, seeing no other comments, let's move along to the next agenda item, which is the North Omaha update.
Thank you for that. The team has been out and about on their listening tour, and we made a commitment that we would come back to the PI committee as well as the entire board and public to let them know what our next steps are and where we're at in that process. So next slide, please, Christy. You saw at the last board meeting that we had the phase one was prior to the vote, and we did do, you'll hear in SD 13, we do check and adjust along the way. So we have made improvements in our outreach efforts in this next phase to really broaden the scope and the net as we reach out to the constituents, especially in the North Omaha area, but not inclusively just to the North Omaha area. So we're right in the middle of that phase. So I will let Tim and Kate give an update of what we've heard so far and what's next.
Great, Lisa. Again, a pleasure to provide an update on this topic to the board and the public. We've been making great strides, and we have enjoyed this outreach work, which I'm excited to share. Where we're at, we don't have fully yet where we're going, but I can tell you where we're at the moment. So next slide. These first two slides are very similar to what you might draw your minds to from last month about the middle part of our listening tour. And this is a sample of those that we're reaching out to, different groups, community organizations, community leaders, etc. It's a big list. I think we have 80 or so different groups and entities and folks that we're seeking to chat with. And that's growing and changing as we're having conversations, but it's really around a few questions. One, just reminding and informing around that if they've heard or understand our resolution for North Omaha Station, what are they hearing? What questions, what concerns, what feedback do they have? How can we engage the community? And so those are the touch points that we're having. So next slide, Christy, this really gives much of where we are at. And so this slide has even changed since it was provided to the Public Information Committee last week. So we start with our employees first, and Kate might help me here, but that's been tried and true in everything that we do. Start with our employees. So we've done that, and we've learned from other outreach efforts to bring those close to our facilities or knowledgeable about a topic. And that's what we did. We invited our employees that live around and near North Omaha Station to come hear from Mr. Underwood and Mr. Fernandez and others about the decision. What does it look like? Questions, concerns they're having, feedback from them about what their friends, family, and neighbors are saying. And so that was a great session that we held just a few weeks ago to engage our employees. So that was a big piece for us. Next is we've been engaged in community safety. And so we were part of Community Safety Day and had, our team says, about 500 attendees were at this event or so. We had our OPPD Respect trailer to give the importance of safety around our electrical infrastructure. And then we also had employees on hand to answer questions. And we had a lot of questions about lowering bills, things that customers are hearing about rooftop solar and energy efficiency. So those are some of the things that we heard as part of that effort. Reported earlier, I talked about LB 1024, the funding for development, other programs in North and South Omaha. Been very, very engaged in that work much before the bill even took place. And so we have been thinking and working on those items for quite some time. And so the hearing was helpful in that regard, and we'll continue to stay very, very engaged with our teams in those efforts. Then also, I apologize for the acronym, but the North Omaha Area Health had a Champion for Change luncheon, excuse me. Our team attended that, and it was a great example of us to just get a sense of topics and issues and just meet with leaders and others that attended. So another example there. Got invited and will continue our strong engagement with the Douglas County Health Department. This particular meeting, they wanted some feedback on streetlights and have our team available to answer questions around North Omaha. So that was another outcome over the last 30 days since last report. A few other things, we've had many one-on-one meetings. We've even been reaching out to other utilities. The Federal Reserve Bank is a touch point, the Chamber, been doing quite a bit with Douglas County Health. And then just last week, we did a tour and discussion with elected officials. So we sent invitations to City Council, Douglas County, and our state senators in the area, and we're pleased we had 4 attendees for that event. And so that was another great opportunity to have a discussion. We're going to look at future dates to do that with others that couldn't make it or other community leaders. So that is really a lot of where we're at in listening and learning. Next slide, Christy. So looking forward, we've been taking our best practices to engage all of you from the board. And so we appreciate your feedback and insight on how you view the engagement or clarifying some things for our team. So I wanted to thank you for that gift of feedback. We really do appreciate it. Continuing tours, lots of one-on-ones, and the plan, act, and measure is definitely ongoing. So I'm pleased and excited that we'll have another robust report for you in November, making more progress as we get to December to start building further actions and outcomes on what we're hearing and engaging around. So with that, Lisa, I'll turn it back over to you and Chair Mulhall.
Thank you so much. We have been attending quite a few events. As part of this listening tour, we were at the Hope Center. It was their 150th gala event, and got some great feedback, and was able to bring some of our employees that work at the North Omaha station. In fact, one of the gentlemen, he's worked at OPPD for 30 years at the station. His wife happens to work in our contact center as well. And he shared the story about how when he was a young man, he would play football for Little Vikes and took a picture with the plant in the background. He said, I never thought in a million years that I'd be working at this plant for over nearly 30 years. So they have such pride, and that's why we open the doors to the public, so that they can see all the people that have given their heart and soul to that plant and love being part of the community. And we're hearing that as well, to say, don't leave us. Make sure that you stay active, especially with this plant. So more to come with the buckets of themes that we're going to be trying to put together, that we will be bringing back to the PI committee, and then ultimately to the rest of the board, and then determining next steps. So we appreciate the time that you've given us to do this listening. We're also hearing great things of what's on their mind besides just the North Omaha station, and especially with the corporate operating plan coming up. We'll be out and about, and we'll be able to get to hear about that as well. So it's coming together beautifully. People are exhausted, but they're energized at the same time. So back to you, Director Mulhoff.
Thank you, Tim and Lisa and the team for all the listening you're doing. I think it's really important that we listen first and act second. I mean, it just really makes sense to me that we will be moving forward in a way that meets the needs of the community, and not just what we think is best for them. So I think that's a great strategy, and appreciate your outlook on that. Any questions, comments from the board? Seeing some head shaking. Okay. All right. Well, let's see. We have one additional item.
Yes.
And that's SD 13.
Yes, exciting times. You've heard customer engagement, stakeholder outreach, almost in every report out that we've been doing. And I am just so proud to have the opportunity to highlight to the board and to the customers about our meaningful outreach and engagement efforts. You know, public power, the hallmark of that, and we talk a lot about that too, especially to some of our partners in the community and outside of the state, that with public power, that it's a home run that we're able to engage our customers and stakeholders. And that's really what helps drive decisions. And especially we provide information to the board of directors as you're making decisions as well. So today I'm excited to provide you a highlight of the progress of SD 13. And many of you have been along this journey with us. So I'm gonna stop for a moment and talk about measurement here. And I know that we just came off of SD7, which measurement is extremely important on that and our progress. SD13 is different in that regard because of the diversity of our work. So we measure success by setting objectives and outcomes for every single one of our engagement efforts. And in the appendix, I believe you have an outline that we have a process that we go through when we have each of the engagements of what is our objective for it and what is our outcome. And then we'll talk a little bit more about the IAP2 overlay on that as well. But of the items on this monitoring report, if you want to go to the next one, the next slide, please, Christy. The three elements, we appreciate the flexibility because the work is so diverse. And I know it's not probably as black and white or concrete as maybe some individuals would like, but we appreciate the flexibility because we can look at the process in these three particular elements. The third one is probably the one I'm the most proud of, and I appreciate Director Moody has been along in this journey as well as the directors, but we really look at how we can evaluate, improve, and get better. And in our line of work, we call that check and adjust along the way. And you'll see that from some of the items, how we did check and adjust, especially during decarbonization or the North Omaha engagement. So I want to just start level set that with that, and you can see the three elements there. In the element of process improvement, we too dialed back this monitoring report. We had 47 slides last year, and we're at 16. So I'm going to go through this pretty quick, but if you have questions, if you could hold those to the end. So of those three, you can see that use an integrated, clear, and transparent engagement process, which you'll see from that icon there. The second one, share context with customer owners around key decisions. And you've heard me say this many times, success of stakeholder engagement is that not all stakeholders may agree with the outcome, but that they understand the why. And I think that that's really starting to resonate with them. And then the last one, of course, was the continuous evaluate and improve its outreach and engagement processes. Next slide, please. Some of you may recognize the plan, act, measure. This was the graphic that we put together from the very beginning of when we built the stakeholder process. And it was Chair McGuire that had challenged us to come up with our stakeholder process. This has served us well, and then we'll talk about a little bit of the growth of it. But we always plan, act, measure, and adjust. And you'll see in the rest of this presentation, in both formal and informal outreach, we define our objectives, plan our approach, follow through with our plan, and assess what went well and where we can improve. So whether it's a multi-year transmission or generation project or a community event, we first define success, we act thoughtfully, and we assess and then improve. Next slide, please. So part of the integration comes from both informal and formal. I just wanted to say that, people love to see OPPD in the community, and they also love to be engaged, actively engaged. So for example, in our Pathways to Decarbonization outreach, we used a formal approach to define our objectives, using the International Association of Public Participation Model, IAP2. And then we educated and engaged through webinars co-hosted by our inside and outside experts. However, we also did the informal daily work of showing up to standing organizational meetings internally so that we're aligned, gatherings internally and externally, and then community talks to talk about this, Rotary clubs, individual, alumni organizations. If they ask us to come, we come talk to them about what's on their mind. So formal outreach is often more prescriptive, but the reality is that the majority of our outreach is informal and it is about showing up on a daily basis. That's even our line techs, the people in the plants. They go home and they get the mail and talk to their neighbors about what's going on. And that's why we always start our communication with our employees, because they're our biggest advocates. I want to also say that, the next slide has really served us well with the IAP2, and I'm going to give you an example here. We really make sure that we're consistent and transparent and supportive, but we needed a structure, and we introduced this a couple of years ago. And it has given us the clarity, both for the board and to the community, to say, how can they engage? How can they show up? But I will tell you that we go from one item to the next and back and forth in our different outreach efforts. Something else worth noting is that the process of the level of commitment to the public they're always going to be involved, no matter what level that we use at that. For instance, even when we were informing stakeholders, we are still engaging and having the discussion to ensure their understanding on an issue or decision. North Omaha Station. At the end of it, we always end our conversation with, did that make sense? Do you understand why we made that decision? And that's where we help figure out if we met the mark. Here's a proud moment. Just a few weeks ago, we presented our formal outreach to our peers at the large Public Power Council. That included Austin Energy, Sacramento, SMUD, Sacramento Municipal Utility District, Salt River Project, and many others. What we learned was that no other utility present used a consistent outreach approach like IEP2, or was even familiar with it, though they were very interested and continued to follow up with us. Flattery, that I told the team, it really was a proud moment that people are coming to us to learn from us, so that we're their benchmark. Next slide, please. I love sports, and I had to have this analogy, and the team put this in here as well. While we have informal outreach, there's a strategy behind it. You always hear me say there's a method to our madness of what's happening. It's about showing up on the field every day. We value relationships, and when we nurture those, we build trust and advocates. And you'll hear a lot about trust coming up. That's going to be our next improvement on all of this. We don't wait for formal public participation to be on the horizon for this to happen. We are constantly visible and engaged in the communities we serve, and that is what helps us when it's time for our formal outreach. There's a lot of times that we'll call up an elected official and they'll say, hey, I know exactly what's going on. I have no questions. That's success as well. Public Affairs puts the game plan together and ensures alignment for the business objective. This alignment gets us all headed towards the same goal. Otherwise, we could be missing each other. And that's been the beauty of this. When we show up in our communities, our customers may see several players, many interactions, and we lean on each other based on the needs of our community. And that's really the beauty also of this outreach effort that we do. It embraces what we're going to be doing with the customer engagement of the future. Both our teams have been working extremely close on that, and they use the same principles. So they definitely complement each other, and we're looking forward to working even closer together. So ultimately, the goal is to see Team OPPD and to continue to build the trust. Next slide, please. So we just covered our informal and informal. Now I'd like to share more about how we've provided context to our stakeholders in a few key areas. And this is where we've kind of shrunk everything up, and we'll just have a few examples. When we first started this journey, stakeholder formal outreach efforts were maybe in, Director Kavanaugh, you probably remember this, maybe 1 or 2 outreach efforts, maybe in 1 or 2 years, right? Usually those projects involved rates or an integrated resource plan. Today, the sheer number of projects have not only grown, but also the horizon for engaging around those projects. And I would also say the complexity of it all. You all know as board members, this is a very complex business. And trying to engage people when they really only think about their utility about 10 minutes per year is difficult. And the team has really embraced that. Also, if you consider power with purpose and pathways to decarbonization, those are taking up to 2 years at least engagement. So it's not a one and done. So we I want to pause a moment for all the outreach. The plans that we've developed. Think about that: 2 natural gas plants, multiple solar sites, and as you all know, that's included many complicated education efforts, and we continue to do that as well. And for each of these sites, there will be routing and site public involvement for all the associated transmission and distribution. So Troy's side of the house they're very used to seeing us, and we're joined at the hip. So I just wanted to point this out simply because the complexity of the work is increasing, and we must share the context with our customer owners so that they understand the full picture of it. So that goes back to the second element of sharing context, especially in the long-term multiple year efforts. They may be involved at one component of it and then pop in later on. Next slide. I'm not going to go through all of these, but and I know it's a list, but it's just a small list of the major heavy lifting that we've been doing over the last year since this last monitoring report. Next slide, please. So let me just highlight maybe a major and middle, and then an outreach that is the day-to-day. Next slide, please. You'll see in this next slide the objective for the decarbonization, what the outcome was, and then right up front, we all agreed to what the levels were. This is another example of where we did a lot of check and adjust along the way. We adapted, and that's where I'm so proud of the team. The discovery sessions were wonderful. We listened, we learned, and used feedback to help us prepare for the energy portfolio workshops. We even made some changes during that in terms of timing and added a few more of the workshops on top of that because there was such a great insight that the customers wanted. The 14 hours of masterclass decarbonization workshops were well attended with over 400 attendees. That's amazing over several weeks and months of engagement. And you also have to remember the level of the people that were engaged. There was highly expert individuals, people that were intrigued by what was going on. And then there was definitely beginners of saying, I want to know more about this. You had to make sure that you were able to communicate in a clear and concise way. At the end of the project, a 185-page final report was issued. Outputs from each workshop included high-level executive summaries. That was a nice add so that people could get that Cliff Notes version of what they needed. Workshop recordings, slides so stakeholders could digest the information at their own pace and provide input. And then also a summary video, taking stakeholders through the entire process through the final results so that they could go fast forward to the section that they wanted. OPPD drove stakeholders to OPPD Community Connect for education, workshop, recordings, PDFs, videos, and we saw over 10,500 page views, 700 views of just the recordings. So people would go through those recordings for hours on end. Nearly 80 comments and questions. Stakeholders rated OPPD with an overall decarb workshop satisfaction rating of 83.7%. Let me repeat that. 83.7% for that long journey that we embarked on. So the results from this decarbonization study also informed our IRP. The feedback on the IRP continued to showcase the efforts made from the Pathways to Decarbonization project, and overall satisfaction for the IRP presentation was at 84%, as neutral, satisfied, or very satisfied. So I just want to pause there and say thank you. This was an enterprise effort. It was groundbreaking for so many. And we have also received a lot of individuals that have called and said, tell us more about what you did during your outreach. So greatly appreciate that. I also want to thank the board for their participation. You were along during all of those segments, so we greatly appreciate that. Next slide, please. Rate design, another ongoing item. We had an objective and an outcome. So we were, as the board knows, because you helped with that direction, we were preparing a long-term vision on rate design. Extremely complicated, extremely complicated. We wanted to figure out, our first phase included an 11-month engagement and outreach processes that would seek to align on rate principles with customer preferences and create a modern foundational document for future rate design. A closed blind qualitative research survey was conducted first to engage more conceptually and organically and in depth with fewer customers than the following quantitative survey. The next quantitative survey allowed us to engage with hundreds of customers and listen to representative voices from various customer groups and gauge or quantify sentiment around rate principles and benchmark a snapshot of that. Part of phase one also included a 3-day full board session, which you all know you were front and center on June 22nd, August 10th, and August 29th, and the public was invited to attend and observe. Workshop recordings were available on OPPD Community Connect, and we received feedback and accepted feedback for the board so that you would get that insight as well. So as a result of these sessions, the board and management will identify and look at what's next for our rate design project. So thank you for that, your commitment on that. Last but not least, next slide, please. The CEO listening tour. Javier had held 37 visits, tours, gatherings, luncheons with elected officials and appointed officials representing mayors, village boards, state senators, county commissioners, city council members, planning commissioners, and wholesale cities to convey how important our generation mix is, and especially on the solar side of it. We have had so much feedback. I was down in Odo County a few weeks ago, and people were like, did you know that OPPD's CEO came down to visit us? That's not going to be a one and done, and they greatly appreciate it. And Javier, thank you for that. I know it was a long trek, but that won't be stopping now. So just so you know. Next slide, please. The last element of SD13, continuous process improvement. And I'll go through this quickly because these are our tools that on the right-hand side of the slide. We want feedback. We do post surveys of how did it go? What could we do differently? Director Bogner knows this. When we opened up the Standing Bear Lake site, you know, we asked at the end, what could we be doing different? And so that we could check and adjust along the way. Those were part of our debriefs, and that's part of our process. We do training and development. Lori and her team, they go to conferences and training development, and then are part of the IEP too. And then networking and relationships, important. We're leaders in that. And then last but not least, the research and benchmarking. As you've heard me say, we have tried to benchmark against others, but people are benchmarking against us, and we'll continue to do that. Next slide, please. This is a part that I'm extremely, it gets at the soul of our servant mentality here at OPPD. And Director Molhoff, I think you'll remember this, sitting at the Sanders County Board meeting before you were going to testify. And the board committee chair pointed us in the front row and said, OPPD, we trust you. And he looked us straight in the eye. And that's how they were able to get those ordinances through. So I just want to say that's when the light bulb went ding, ding, ding for me to say that's our value proposition. So we have been embarking in the public affairs area on the Deloitte model of trust. And those elements are humanity, transparency, credibility, and integrity. those could be our core values, which really feed right into those core values. So you're going to be hearing more about that for next year, and we're going to try to put some measurements around. Yes, Director Yoder, I did say that. I'm going to try to put some measurements around the foundations of trust. So last slide. Here's the punchline. If we had to measure our success in our organization, this graphic helps us see where we've been and where we're heading. I'm the most proud of the team for this. As an organization, this maturity model has significantly shown where we've been. First, the outreach team didn't even formally exist until 2016-17. And prior to that, we were just a bit inconsistent, even though we were out and about. And the board had asked us to put a formal stakeholder outreach. Since then, we've defined our outreach lanes, which gives us focus on how to best support and move the needle in the communities we serve. We've created policies and processes that help us with our consistency and alignment. We adopted IEP2 principles, which are best in class, and again, not used by many yet. Benchmarked audits and surveys have been on continuous process improvement. And in 2020, launched OPPD Community Connect, which has been another industry leading tool that people are really embracing. Now that processes and policies are in place, we're looking ahead and pushing ourselves further. We tend to be a little bit overachievers. Can you imagine that? So how do we bring more people to the table? Can youth and retiree engagement expand perspective and feedback? How can we provide a deeper dive and educate on utility matters? And can we be more strategic around community boards that we should be on so that we can be that catalyst in those communities that we serve? So the list could go on, and for time's sake, I'm just going to say in closing, I'm very proud of the work that the entire enterprise has done, but public affairs being that quarterback of what's going on. And I want to really thank the board and management and the whole organization for their involvement and their support. So with that, Director Mohoff, the recommendation is yours.
Thank you. You can see the recommendation there that we are sufficiently in compliance. Are there any additional reflections on what's been accomplished, challenges or gaps that any other board members would like to address at this time? Director Moody.
Yes, thank you, Director Mulhoff. A couple things. In which order to take this? First, thank you for the appendix slides. Those were super interesting to see and helpful to understand the growth. And, one of them represents, I think, quite well how the work is rapidly intensified in volume and complexity. And, my time on the board, 100%. So I want to just sort of honor and acknowledge the fact that there's been some really exceptional work that's happened. And as I look out into the future, and maybe this is one of the questions, we've placed a high priority on execution over the coming years. And I have to assume, maybe I'm looking for affirmation here, that this outreach is a key ingredient to that execution over time, whether it's siting transmission, siting plants, making decisions about generation. Fair assessment, fair to say as much?
Absolutely. In fact, I almost look at this. In fact, some of the team members are like, do we even need SD13 anymore? Because it's so institutionalized in everything that we do. Before it was like, oh, let's just go out and maybe talk to the customers and let's see. It was one of those, but this is our DNA now.
Yeah, which is great. So 100% agree with that. And that makes all the sense in the world to me. One of the questions that I have is I really like this IEP2 model, and the three examples that you cited, I totally understand that those are tiny little sample size of all of the public outreach that you do, to be sure, but they were all inform consult. So I'm kind of curious to understand, the extent to which it hops over into the third, fourth, and fifth, involve, collaborate, or empower. I mean, I assume Greener Together is one example of that. But help me think about, or can you give me a sense for the extent to which we zoom past consult on occasion?
Well, it's great question, and we talk a lot about that. And inside the engagement portion of it, it can change. I'll just tell you on Empower. That could be even with, well, it's Wendell Young's group now, right? It was Steve Fanslaw's group. When they're out talking to the customer and where a poll could get placed or whatever, that's where they're talking to the customer to say, wow, okay, I can take that feedback, or even on the transmission siding, that input empowered us to make that change, right? That's just the day-to-day interactions as well. North Omaha station engagement, we've talked a lot about that. Once we find from this listening tour, it could be in the collaborate side of it, right? But we just don't know that yet. So there are small instances where it can go all the way to the empowerment stage.
Great, those are good examples. Yeah, that's great. Those are good examples. Thank you for highlighting those. And my last question, and again, this is a slide in the appendix, which refers to the digital presence maturing. And perhaps there's a little bit of overlap here with an SD5 customer service, but how did, I don't know what the specific question here is, other than do you feel like we have opportunities to continue to do to allow our digital to do better? And I'm not talking about Twitter and Facebook and Nextdoor, right? Like, I'm talking about the platforms that we own and operate.
Yep.
And the way in which our customer owners get information, understand information, and engage with information.
The answer is absolutely yes. And that's part of, I appreciate the prioritization that we've put as a leadership team and the organization, because we talk a lot about how we need those tools of how we could have that interaction. And with AMI coming and some of those, it's going to change the way we do business. And the organization is extremely excited about it. I would say we're not as patient as we need to be, but we're working on that.
Okay, thank you. This is a good report. I am complete, Janice. Pass them back.
Thank you. Any other directors have comments, questions, concerns? I just want to say in our committee meeting, I did ask Lisa, I said, you know, with all this increase in volume and intensity as Director Moody said, you know, how have we done staffing wise? And we've added one additional staff member to this team, maybe looking at another, but for sure, you know, this report reflects the dedication and the engagement and the productivity of that team, and how they engage the community as a whole, but also all of our elected officials and others who are stakeholders. So thank you to the team, and thank you to Lisa and Tim for this this update. And with that, I think the PI committee report is complete.
All right, thank you. We'll move on to the next item on our agenda, which is the confirmation of the board meeting agenda. If we can get that, thank you. Are there any requests to move anything off of the consent agenda onto the board discussion item list? Go ahead, Director Williams.
Yeah, I'd like an opportunity for SD7 to be on the discussion.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other items? All right, so we will move that item, the SD7 monitoring report, to board discussion and leave all the other items on the consent agenda for Thursday. All right, now we'll review the board work plan. We currently don't have anything officially in the parking lot. However, I think I heard maybe two items that came out of our discussion today that might move that direction. So for the committee chairs that own those topics, I'll allow you to review the process to putting items on the parking lot, and we can talk about those at the next meeting. All right, we will now move on to the Power with Purpose Solar, Natural Gas, and Transmission update. Mr. Vai, I'll start with you.
Very good. As promised, we continue to bring back, actually, let me turn my video on, sorry. As promised, we continue to bring back updates on the work that we're doing, and there's a lot of work associated with these items. And so I think we have Megan, who's here to start the conversation.
Yep, thanks, Troy. Good afternoon. Next slide, and I'll start us off with the updates on our natural gas generation facilities, starting with Standing Bear Lake on the next slide. So as anticipated, site completion for Standing Bear Lake is January 2024. There's lots of construction activities going on at the site with our EPC, or Engineer Procure Construct vendor. The substation area, they are doing grounding work and drilled piers. And in the power block or generation area, we like to call it, they're working on significant amount of underground piping, duct banks, and foundation work. And from a gas supply or fuel supply perspective, MUD, or Metropolitan Utilities District, is supporting installation of a gas pipeline to that facility. From equipment and perspective, we are receiving breakers for the substation, as well as additional auxiliary equipment from Wartzilla, who is the provider of our reciprocating internal combustion engines. I do have a couple pictures new for sharing this today. On the right-hand side is a drone image or aerial view of the site taken on September 18th, 2022. Just to kind of orient you, this would be from Military Road looking south at the site. On the left-hand side, you'll see a large rectangular area. That will be home of our future substation. And then on the right-hand side, you'll see what looks like kind of white rectangular areas. Those are the reciprocating internal combustion engine foundations. And just below that, and closest to the screen, is kind of what looks like a square area, and that will be the administrative building. And then on the lower hand side, lower left, bottom picture, we have a close-up view of the foundation work on the engines. And this would be if you were standing kind of at the south of the site looking northwest, and kind of an up-close view of some of the engine foundations, respectively. With that, if you would like to go to the next slide, Christy. For Turtle Creek Station, this site is also anticipated to be complete by January of 2024. There are similar construction activities in progress at this site as well. In the substation area, they are also working on grounding work and drilled piers. And from a generation perspective, again, a lot of work is currently going on for underground piping, duct banks, foundation work, a lot of embedded conduit for our combustion turbines. And then Northern Natural Gas is currently installing a gas pipeline to the facility and to the site. From a major equipment perspective, Siemens has shipped our first unit one, we call it, of our combustion turbine and generator. They're on their way to the local area. We anticipate having a couple of heavy haul paths here over the next 2 weeks from the local rail spur to the site. And then additionally, other equipment that's being received at the site includes substation breakers and auxiliary equipment from Siemens as well. On this picture, or on this slide, we have on the right-hand side a aerial image as well. This was also taken in mid-September. This would be if you were standing on Fairview Road looking south. 168th Street would be off to the right. It's kind of the road that you can see to the right-hand side of the picture. And just to give you some orientation, in the very far southern area is what is our power block and generation area. That will be where we house our administrative building, 2 combustion turbines, and 2 generators. That large rectangular area in the middle is the substation area. And then the smaller rectangular area closer to the screen is really currently being utilized as a laydown yard for the engineer, procure, and construct vendor. And then on the lower left picture, we have a close-up view of work being done right around what would be the home of our Unit 2 combustion turbine. And what you see there is embedded conduit being placed prior to the foundation and setting of the combustion turbine. With that, that concludes my update for Standing Bear Lake and Turtle Creek Station. I'm happy to answer any questions before turning it over to Courtney for a solar update. Not seeing any questions. With that, I'll turn that over to you, Courtney.
Great, thank you. I'll do a quick audio check. All right. Great. Good afternoon. A couple of slides here on the solar project deployment. So if we can go to the next slide, please. We'll talk about where Plattview's at, an update on federal policy, and then a couple of key items for our solar deployment. Next slide, please. In the execution space, Plattview Solar continues to move forward. We have ongoing work in partnership with AES, the owner of the PPA, as well as their EPC firm to ensure that we're locking in equipment, we're advancing the design work to keep on track with the schedule. The most notable work since the last update is taken here in a photo, which is conducting the pile load testing. So this is an important step in the design phase, which actually has to happen on site. And this will help us determine the soil conditions, ultimately to feed into the structural design of the facility, getting into the depth of the piling, et cetera. So exciting to have a photo up here to share of work on the site. In addition to all these efforts, we continue to coordinate with the community and the landowners as we move through the process. Next slide, please. Quick update here on federal policy. So talked last month about the IRA, or the Inflation Reduction Act. This is a monumental act for our industry, for energy. And so it's exciting to kind of see how this rolls out. Really, since the last time we updated, there's not a whole lot of additional detail, but there's a lot of analysis and trying to understand what this is going to actually look like when it gets implemented. One of the major announcements since the last board meeting was that the Department of Treasury and the IRS are seeking public input on how they implement these clean energy tax credits. So there's 6 key areas there on the slide. They've opened this up for 30 days, so that'll be until November 4th, really trying to get stakeholders across the spectrum to weigh in on how they'd like to see this roll out. The Treasury and IRS have said these responses will actually inform how they implement the legislation. So our staff continue to be engaged through LPPC, APPA, and other industry groups to ensure our voice and our collective public power voice is being heard. This is a lot to unravel, to understand. And so there's a lot of people at OPPD trying to unpack and figure out how we sort of build this into our, not only solar plans, but other projects that we have going on now or in the future. Last slide I'll talk about is really kind of looking broadly at the work that we're doing. There is a lot of work that continues to happen, and a lot of times it's behind the scenes. It's not yet in the public eye, but we're doing a lot to make sure that we can deploy solar that we have called out as Power with Purpose. So I want to discuss a couple of work streams just to understand the magnitude of work. The first one is the ongoing education and advocacy across our service territory. Each month, our staff attend and participate in meetings, whether it's at planning zoning commissions or other settings. And as Lisa called out earlier in PI, we have staff, including Javier, that are out discussing solar, discussing the importance of it, helping through regulations, moratoriums, those types of things. So there's a lot of work that goes on. Specifically, the last month, we've been in Cass, Otoe, and Washington. Additionally, there's a lot of meetings going on with our suppliers. This is a very competitive market that has a lot of challenges with the supply chain right now. And so it's important for us, my team, supply chain, to maintain relationships with suppliers, whether those are the developers or the equipment suppliers. And ultimately, they will help us kind of craft the best sourcing strategy for how we go back to the market to deploy the rest of the solar. Last month, staff attended the RE Plus conference, and we met with more than 15 of our close supplier relationships, understanding what the developers are seeing, what projects they have in the pipeline, but also starting to get into the space of module suppliers. How are they going to work through IRA? Likewise, trackers, racking, inverters, etc. So these are really critical conversations that we have and relationships that we maintain so that when we do go back to the market, we approach it the right way. Additionally, I want to be clear, we are studying multiple sites. So beyond Platteview, which is 81 megawatts in Saunders County, we have additional sites that we are studying for potential to meet the 519 megawatts. Each of these sites is nuanced. It requires understanding how you're going to interconnect to the transmission system, what the specific technical challenges and requirements are of the site, what the financial analysis is for that site, and then ultimately determining the best structure and approach for that specific project. So there's a lot of evaluation happening across multiple teams at OPPD to land on these best sites. The last thing I'll note in relationship to the last slide is that the IRA is a big deal, as I mentioned. It helps public power look at deploying these projects differently than we've had in the past. These credits allow us to potentially consider ownership. And so that is something that we are evaluating as we gain clarity around the IRA. So there's a lot of efforts going on to deploy solar, and that's a snapshot of a few of those. With that, unless there's any questions, that is the solar update this month.
I don't see any hands right now. Board, do you have any questions for Courtney?
Let me, if I may, Chair Bogner, really quick, I think that this last piece that Courtney described on the Inflation Recovery Act and the relevance, the magnitude of that change for our operations and for the way we decide different financing, ownership, operational factors into this project, it's huge. It is taking the team a lot of time and effort to make sure that we understand as best as we can. And as Courtney said, there are still a lot of unknowns, right? The IRS hasn't issued all the relevant specifics for how some of these provisions will be treated in practical terms. But it is very important for me to share, how exciting this is, because it really opens up a lot of opportunities for us to continue to pursue purchase power agreements like we've done in the past, and also consider ownership framework. On the ownership side, I do not want to undermine the very significant step that this would require for us, from the utility operations side of the organization, of training and hiring people, employees who would be operating and maintaining potentially new technology that we don't have. So I want Courtney shared the tip of the iceberg, but there's a lot of huge body of work underneath that we are diligently studying and trying to better understand so that we can deploy our power with purpose strategy in the best possible way for our customer owners. So more to come once we have more information to share. I'm excited, and I think we're all looking for more guidance from the federal government.
All right, thank you. A couple hands I see. Director Williams.
Great. Yeah, appreciate the updates both on solar and the natural gas facilities. Just generally, thanks very much for all the ongoing work, both on the project that's currently proceeding, Platteview, and the future projects as well. And then on the two successful sites that are continuing to move forward, even with external challenges. I'm glad to hear that the team is so dedicated and doing such great work to get the construction portion of the projects done. So appreciate all the updates. I'm glad to hear that things are moving ahead. I know it's difficult, but thank you for everything that all of these teams have done in both of those areas. Appreciate the information today. Thanks.
All right, Director Spurgeon.
I'll echo Director Williams' appreciation as well. My question, I noticed that U.S. Department of Treasury and the IRS are asking for public input on implementation of clean energy tax credits. And I was wondering if OPPD people are thinking about throwing in their 2 cents. I think your viewpoint is unique in that public power is often not asked about this. So if you have insights and suggestions, I sure hope you throw them in. Thank you.
All right, any other questions or comments? All right, that was the last agenda item for today. So with that, we will conclude this meeting, and I will see you guys on Thursday at 5 o'clock at the Civic Center for our board meeting. Thank you.